So, I spent the last hour recording this intro, and what do I find out? It's a black screen. Hooray! It's okay. I'm okay. I promise. I'm okay. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, after months of research, editing, recording, sweat, tears, blood, patience, I can proudly and happily finally say welcome. Welcome everybody to the community Yakuza Iceberg video. I've always wanted to make an iceberg of my own because icebergs are something that I've found myself taking a liking to, and it's important to mention that I cannot take full credit for this one because a while ago I made a brainstorming video for a Yakuza iceberg, and I was asking viewers to contribute with any ideas that they might have. Because even though I started with the very first Yakuza on the PS2, there's still a lot of things that go under my radar, or simply that I just forget about them. I'm only human after all, just like you! Crazy, right? And I just want to say right now, thank you so much for everyone that said anything in that brainstorming video, no matter how little or how big. I myself learned so much researching about this iceberg and looking things up, even though, again, I started with the very first Yakuza game and I played all of them and pretty much saw everything there is to see. Now, there's multiple ways for you to enjoy this. You could be playing this in the background as you enjoy doing something else, or you could be giving it your full undivided attention. Either way, pull up a seat, grab something to drink or to snack on, or both. And I want to say thank you. Thank you so much for tuning in. Now, without delaying things too much, let's talk some Yakuza. Yakuza is a Japanese game series that took its first steps all the way back in 2005 with its first game. The series has Japanese organized crime at its core, but usually focuses more on the subject matter of humanity within the different criminal figures that you see throughout. The series was a hit in Japan pretty early on, and until around the English release of Yakuza 0, it didn't have as much of a smooth sailing outside of Japan. But one look at the community now tells you just how far it's come in terms of popularity. If you don't know what an iceberg is, it's a chart that usually lists topics or entries regarding a specific topic. These entries start at the sky from commonly known topics, going through this iceberg down to the abyss. The further down we go, the more uncommon, obscure, or bizarre topics can get. Usually the two types you'll find are either meme icebergs or informative icebergs. The iceberg we're gonna take a look at today aims to be the informative type, with some meme entries sprinkled here and there. The goal here is to try and spread more information about things that some of you may not know about. Heck, there's a lot of things I myself learned, and I've been a fan for like over 15 years at this point. I tried as best as I could to put things where I think they belong, but do keep in mind that things like this are subjective. So some of you may think something should be lower or higher. For example, there may be things closer to the top that a longtime fan may not have known, which actually happened to a friend of mine. I showed him the iceberg and he didn't know that Ichiban and Nishiki share the same voice actor. And there may be things closer to the bottom that some of you may not consider obscure, and you know, so on and so forth. Also, be warned that this will contain spoilers for a lot of Yakuza games, so go into this at your own risk. One more thing, I just want to give a quick thank you to everyone who threw around ideas in the brainstorming video. They'll be getting mentions throughout the video in their respective topics. Now, without wasting any more time, grab some popcorn and enjoy the show. Like a dragon. Up until recently, this series has always been known as Yakuza worldwide, while the Japanese title is Ryuga Gotoku, which translates to like a dragon. The English and Japanese titles have always had this clear difference. It's kind of like how Resident Evil is known as Biohazard in Japan. Things started to change when the 8th mainline title decided to incorporate Like a Dragon into its name, with the name being Yakuza Like a Dragon. The Japanese name for that game is Ryuga Gotoku 7, so calling it Yakuza 7 is also fair game. In the recent RGG Summit that took place in September of this year, however, 3 games were announced for both Japan and worldwide, and instead of any of them having Yakuza in the name, they all now have Like a Dragon instead. So the upcoming Ishin localization is titled Like a Dragon Ishin for us. It's an odd point of time to change the title, but at the same time it makes sense with the series getting as big as it is now, and them getting more comfortable with the sales outside of Japan enough to make a move like this. RGG Studio. RGG Studio is the developer behind all of the Yakuza games. RGG here stands for Ryuga Gotoku, which is the Japanese name for the series, as we've just said. The studio was founded by Toshihiro Nagoshi, who was also responsible for the existence of these games. Nagoshi no longer works there, and the studio is now headed by Masayoshi Yokoyama, who was series producer and writer for a long time. Damidane. I know there's probably not going to be a single viewer that doesn't know about this, but for formality's sake, we still gotta talk about it, and talk about it we shall. This phrase refers to the song Bakamitai, which is featured in several of the Yakuza games as a piece that you can sing in any karaoke joint. There is more than one version of this song, but it first debuted in Yakuza 5 with up to 3 characters being able to sing it, namely Kiryu, Akiyama, and Saejima. It would later go on to be available to a character called Namba in Yakuza Like a Dragon. The popularity boom that happened with this particular song was a result of deepfake videos circulating around the internet, in which you'd see all sorts of characters sing. I would assume as more of these videos popped up, people would see fictional characters or even real people that they recognize singing this song, and that's what would have helped spread the meme around. Mainline games. This is simply all of the games that contain the main story of the Yakuza series. So that would be Yakuza 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Like a Dragon, or 7 if you prefer to go with that. All of these games are directly connected with one another and share major mutual elements. Anything outside of this category is a spin-off, and spin-offs vary in terms of how many people know about some of them, so I decided to put those in different tiers. Kiwami. The Kiwami games are remakes in essence. As of now, there's only 2 remakes of the 2 first Yakuza games, titled Yakuza Kiwami and Yakuza Kiwami 2. The Kiwami remakes have a bit of a reputation with recycling assets. Compared to brand new numbered entries or even spin-offs, the Kiwami games have considerably more asset reuse, which is telling of how they have less budget than a new game. Small update sometime after recording this, just wanted to add that we're getting a 3rd Kiwami game coming, and that will be Like a Dragon Ishin, which is titled Ryuga Gotoku Ishin Kiwami in Japan. Judgment games. It's not an extensive series by any means, but now with the addition of a sequel recently, it's easier to call this a sub-series of Yakuza. So far, it only has 2 entries, those being Judgment and Lost Judgment. Instead of the usual familiar faces, you take control as Takayuki Yagami in both of the games, a private detective for hire. The main link between the Judgment games and the Yakuza games are the cities that you play in, Kamurocho and Yokohama. There are other things that you would normally see have a larger role in the Yakuza games, such as the Tojo and the Omi clans. However, in the Judgment games, their involvement is relatively minor and has no impact on the overall story of Yagami. That being said, being in the same universe as the mainline series, everything that happens in these games is canon to the Yakuza games and vice versa. In the beginning of Lost Judgment, Yagami acknowledges the disbanding of the Tojo clan, so there's that. Karaoke. Karaoke is a minigame that you're able to play in most Yakuza games. It was first introduced in Yakuza 3, with Kiryu having one song of his own, Haruka having one of her own, and the others sung by hostesses, with Kiryu being able to cheer them on. As time went on, this minigame became extremely popular with fans, and so as more games came out, there would usually be new songs for people to enjoy. I think it wouldn't be a stretch to say that the popularity of this minigame peaked with Yakuza 0, which had you sing karaoke as part of the main story very early on. Yakuza 0 was already having its own popularity boom that attracted many new fans to the series, but seeing the visuals and the idea impressed a lot of new players going in. Maybe it wouldn't even be ridiculous to say that the karaoke part helped convince people to continue playing. I know I've seen so many people comment on my karaoke videos of the game, and people would talk about how they were sold as soon as they saw the cinematic of the song Judgment. Do you happen to be one by any chance? Anyway, now we're at a point where one of the biggest points of anticipation when we get a new Yakuza game is the karaoke songs that it will have to offer. I remember this happening with Yakuza Like a Dragon, and I'm glad that it didn't disappoint. Here's hoping that future games will continue to deliver. Face models. A lot of the characters that you see throughout the series have faces that were taken directly from a real actor. Usually when they implement an actor's face, their voice will accompany it as well. These characters range from essential story characters to minor characters that don't have as big of an involvement in the story, to NPCs that you see in sub-stories or minigames. RGG Studios absolutely loves bringing real people into their games, maybe even to a fault. Their reliance on them kind of backfired on at least 2 occasions before as well, but I digress. We'll talk about those 2 instances in more detail later. There are simply too many examples of face models to mention here, but simple examples are the Dojima lieutenants in Yakuza 0. Kuze is played by Hitoshi Ozawa, Awano is played by Riki Takeuchi, Shibusawa is played by Hideo Nakano, all of whom are renowned and accomplished actors. More recent examples include Yagami, played by Takuya Kimura, who I heard time and time again is probably the biggest star you'll find in Japan, and Hiroshi Tamaki, who plays Soma in Lost Judgment. Random, non-related fun fact, Hiroshi Tamaki also plays the main character in The Way of the House Husband as an ex-Yakuza who left that world to become, well, a house husband. I've seen people memeing about how Soma in Lost Judgment is Tatsu prior to leaving that life behind, and I found that to be amusing, so if you didn't know about this, now you do. Anyway, I think most people can agree that it would be criminal to move away from this entry without mentioning any hostess actresses. So what I can briefly tell you about them is that a lot of the hostesses that you see throughout the series are usually either pin-up models or, well, actresses who take part in not exactly wholesome movies. But I'm sure a lot of you are already familiar with that, and even if you're not, do your research on this one. What I do want to bring up that I find more interesting and informative, however, is the way they cast these actresses. I remember many years ago, every time a new Yakuza game would get announced, there would also be articles going around about how RGG Studios are now accepting auditions from women around Japan to star in their games. However, I'm not sure if they have to have some kind of nightlife background to them, or if that's just a coincidence. Either way, I'm sure a lot of you already know about most of this, so let's just move on to our next stop. Mr. Libido. Mr. Libido is an NPC that you can meet in Yakuza 0, and because of his wild nature, it didn't take long for him to be memed on and for him to be one of the more memorable things about the game for many people. There are 2 Mr. Libidos, Akimoto, who Kiryu meets in Kamurocho, and Habu, who Majima meets in Sotemburi. Out of the 2, Habu is 100% the more popular one, for probably obvious reasons. Table Slam. Much like Bakimitai, this became one of the bigger memes that most likely drew people into the franchise. This is originally a scene that happens towards the end of Yakuza 2 and Yakuza Kiwami 2. The context for it is that Kiryu's love interest in that game, Kaoru, was heading off to do something that could end up causing her death. So before doing so, she left a heartfelt message for Kiryu, expressing how much she enjoyed being with him throughout the events of the game. And upon hearing all of what she had to say, Kiryu simply slams the desk and leaves, leaving his friend Date alone in the room. This wraps up what is probably the shortest tier, the Sky tier, containing the most known things about Yakuza. And now we will move on to the second tier, the tip of the iceberg, which has things that are still widely known, but they may not be the first things that come to mind when you think of the franchise. Jav idols. We've just spoken briefly about them in the previous tier, but similar to face models or actors that show up as characters in the Yakuza games, Jav idols are actors specifically involved with the real-life adult industry in one shape or form, and there is a ton of them throughout the series. As far as I know, all of them are women, and they're most commonly seen as hostesses in clubs around the city. From all the examples that I know, their real-life name is also used as is when they're made into NPCs in these games. A few examples throughout the series include Ai and Hibiki from Yakuza 0, Anri Okita from Yakuza 6, Ryo from Yakuza 4, and Kana from Kiwami 2. Now I know you may be thinking of someone like Mr. Libido and you're wondering, well, maybe he's a male example of a real-life Jav figure? The answer as far as I've looked around is no. Mr. Libido's actor, Habu, is just an actor, and according to IMDb, he's only had one other role in a movie from 2012. If you know any examples of male JAF figures in Yakuza games, do let me know in the comments. Popularity surges. This refers to the bursts in popularity that had a notable effect in bringing new fans for Yakuza. As some of you may know, Yakuza didn't have the best performance outside of Japan at first, and it hit an all-time low after the English release of Yakuza Dead Souls in 2012, a zombie shooter spin-off where the sales weren't exactly the best. Later in that same year, on December 5th, Yakuza 5 was released in Japan, and it was a hit. It was the biggest game in the series to date, and people like me imported the game because we probably would have had to wait at least a year to play it in English. Imagine how fans of the series at the time felt when they had not a single word of localization news for 3 whole years. It was a very dark time for the series, and things weren't really looking good. However, this didn't stop fans from trying their best to convey their love and wishes to see the game localized. And so, in those 3 years, you would see passionate fans expressing their desire to see the game localized in many forms: petitions, videos, campaigns, and so on. One such example is a campaign that went by Day of the Dragon, made by the user The King of Rufus, who would also go on to make videos trying to spread awareness about the series. Alongside him, there was also Tojo HQ, who actually managed to reach out to RGG sound director Hidenori Shoji and told him about the Day of the Dragon campaign, and he said he would relay that to Nagoshi and Yokoyama. It was actually around this time that I started uploading videos for Yakuza as well. That includes videos of Yakuza 5. Everyone in the community just really wanted to put it out there that we really wanted to see the series continue existing in English. You cannot imagine how happy everyone was when Gio Corsi stepped on stage in PlayStation Experience of 2014 and announced to the world that Yakuza 5 in English was finally going to happen. Gio Corsi initiated a hashtag in 2013 called #BuildingTheList, which was a way to ask fans to request games that they wanted to see on the Vita or just brought onto PlayStation consoles in general. Yakuza 5 happened to be one of those most requested games, and because of that, it got to see the light of day. Anyway, that was a brief history lesson on how Yakuza could have died but didn't. Now I want to get back on the topic of the key points that most likely contributed to the fame of Yakuza. I'd like to think that there's 3 major key points that brought in more fans than any other time frames. Those being 1. Yakuza 0, 2. The Damedane meme, and 3. Yakuza Like a Dragon. I'm sure I don't need to say much about the Bakemitai one, but as for the Yakuza 0 one, I would say that most likely happened because the PR and the marketing for the game was finally at its best compared to previous entries. Word was spreading around and codes were being given to many content creators, which only further contributed to giving it the recognition it ended up getting. And with how Lost Judgment is the first game to be released worldwide at the same time, it honestly just makes me happy seeing where the series stands now outside of Japan. And hopefully we continue to get more simultaneous releases going forward, because even the original Yakuza 1 had a gap between the Japanese and English releases. Ichiban and Nishiki share the same voice actor. This is self-explanatory. Kazuhiro Nakaya is the voice actor of Akira Nishikiyama, and they later brought him back to voice Ichiban in Yakuza Like a Dragon as well as Yakuza Online, which is a game that we'll talk more in detail about later on. Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. This is a crossover spin-off between Yakuza and Hokuto no Ken. As you may know, Yakuza is called Ryuga Gotoku in Japan, so what they did with this game is they mixed Ryuga Gotoku with Hokuto no Ken to give us Hokuto ga Gotoku. The game is made by RGG Studios, bringing us an original story that makes use of elements from the source material, meaning that characters such as Rao, Jagi, and Toki are in the game, but their roles may differ from what fans of Hokuto no Ken are used to. It also introduced brand new characters that aren't in the source material, such as Targa, Nadai, Jagre, and Kisana. The game plays out pretty much exactly the way you would expect out of a Yakuza game. You have chapters, you navigate through a city called Eden in this game, you can visit different shops, play mini-games, have street fights, do sub-stories, and you get some pretty exciting fights during the course of the story. It's a great game, and personally speaking, I had a lot of fun with it. And I do think it's a shame now that it's exclusive to the PS4. I really hope that we get to see it on Steam one day. Amon Clan. The Amon Clan is a secret organization of assassins that we still don't know much about. Your first encounter with them is through a man named Joe Amon, who is a secret boss that you get to fight in the very first Yakuza game after beating all of the sub-stories. And this is usually the condition for most games, beating all of the sub-stories. From there on, the clan, or at least Joe Amon, would make it a personal task to come back time and time again to defeat Kiryu and prove that he's the better fighter. In games with multiple protagonists, such as Yakuza 0, Yakuza 4, and Yakuza 5, you get to fight other members of the clan. With Yakuza 0, it's Majima that fights a younger Joe Amon, while Kiryu fights Joe's father, So Amon. In Yakuza 4, Akiyama gets to fight Kazuya Amon, Saejima fights Jiro Amon, Tanimura fights Sango Amon, and Kiryu, of course, fights Joe Amon. In Yakuza 5, all of the same Amon members return, but since Tanimura is absent, Shinada is the one who ends up fighting Sango. And since Haruka is a playable character in 5, yes, she also has her own Amon, Noah Amon, who you end up having a dance-off with. Yakuza 6 is the last game canonically where Kiryu and Joe Amon would meet. Interestingly enough, after their fight, Kiryu somehow convinces Joe to join him in the Clan Creator minigame as an ally, telling him that he would get to fight every day to become stronger as a selling point, and that he's free to ambush Kiryu whenever he feels like it. Joe is absolutely sold, of course, but says that Kiryu is making a mistake. In Judgment, we also meet an Amon, but this one is different. His name is Shin Amon, which is most likely a pun because Shin literally translates to new. This guy is way less grim than Joe and seems to actually be kind of a chill guy. People memed about his fight so much because first of all, he steals your access to your own inventory, and also back when the game was only available on the PS4, he would cause intense frame rate drops. And people would jokingly say that it's an intentional fourth wall breaking move, which I do think is amusing and fitting. Yakuza Like a Dragon has Shin Amon returning. You have to go through the Millennium Tower dungeon and reach the top to be able to do so. The funny thing about this fight is what happens afterwards. You see that Kiryu was basically in cahoots with Shin. After Ichiban leaves, Kiryu asks Shin whether Ichiban was a formidable opponent. This actually only reinforces what I said with the Judgment part, that Shin seems to be exceptionally chill for a guy with the Amon clan, and it just makes me think about how strict or the opposite they are. In Lost Judgment, you meet Shin once again, and you learn that he's now been exiled from the clan. Just as you're about to fight him, you're introduced to Juzo Amon, the older sibling of Shin. You see Juzo somehow lifting Shin high above, and then dropping him, which kills Shin. Juzo then teleports you somewhere else and you fight him. After the fight, you see that Shin is actually alive, and what do you know? He's rooting for your victory. And then he even offers to grab drinks together. What a great guy. Ishin and Kenzan also have their own Amons, but I can't tell you much because I haven't fought those myself. Dead Souls also features an Amon named Rasetsu Amon, but this one is a zombie, and a goddamn powerful one. If the quick dictionary search I looked up is anything to go by, Rasetsu means evil spirit or man-eating demon, so that's comforting. You actually do meet Joe Amon at first, but the zombified Amon interrupts him and you get to fight him instead. This one is a tiny bit dark because Amon accuses Kiryu of killing his 3 apprentices that we saw in Yakuza 4 and 5, but Kiryu denies having done anything like that. And then it comes to light that Rasetsu was most likely the culprit. Lastly, we come to Fists of the North Star Lost Paradise, where you fight Joe Amon for some reason because why the hell not, I guess. The most interesting thing about him in this game, though, is that it's divided into 3 parts. You begin fighting him, and after dealing enough damage, Amon hops into a car, and then Kenshiro follows suit, and then you two have a race. The loser of the race ends up taking damage once you reach the destination, and then you would continue fighting for the final time. Beating him gives you an entertaining trophy called Go Back to Kamurocho. Sam Lee. Sam Lee is an actor from Hong Kong that found his way into the Chinese release of Yakuza 0 as a face model and voice actor for Lao Gui. I would assume the main reason for this is similar to why Yakuza brings actors to begin with, to help with brand recognition and to appeal to more people that may look at these actors and go, oh wait, I know this person, maybe I should check this game out. Another reason is likely because when Yakuza has foreign characters, they tend to bring in voice actors that aren't native with the language, and likely just go off with a transliteration instead. I remember seeing time and time again in my comments that the original Lao Gui doesn't exactly speak right, and same for Junki Han when he speaks Korean in Yakuza 6.
어떻게 된 거지? 타츠카와는 뭐 하고 있는 거야?
The one example that I think most of us can understand is Andre Richardson in Yakuza 3. His speech isn't incomprehensible by any means, but it sounds kinda cheesy and emphasized.
If I'd known it would have come to this, I'd have killed you when first we met. If you're looking for Daigo, Mine's taken him up to the roof. This is the end of the line for you. Kazuma Kiryu.
You know, this makes me think. Imagine if we ever get an English-speaking villain in the future and they actually cast someone like Terry Crews for him. How fucking bonkers would that be? Asset recycling. Oh boy, where do we begin with this one? Let me start off by saying there's absolutely nothing wrong with asset recycling. If anything, I included it here just because of the meme sort of status that it's attained with Yakuza by now. I don't know about you guys, but I find it easier with Yakuza to recognize reused assets. Or maybe it's just that Yakuza reuses assets more than other game series, which probably is the case. I can't say for sure, honestly. But setting that aside, I do think that asset reuse at the very least saves a lot of time, effort, and money. And so it is likely a smart decision, and with the right approach, you may not even notice it. Let me give you an example of this. Take a look at this quick time event from Yakuza 0 against Kuze. Fast forward into Kiwami against Nishiki and look at that. The exact same animations in a quick time event. Granted, they do add to it, but I feel like this is one of those cases where you look at this and you go, yep, that's just Kuze's quick time event. Now let me give you an example of asset reuse that most of you will probably not even stop to question. In Yakuza 3, you have a heat action called Essence of Smoking. Pretty badass heat action. This is the first time that it appears in the series. Now fast forward to something like Yakuza 5 and here it is. This is a situation where you're more likely to say, oh shit, this made it back, instead of, oh, asset reuse. Another example is a particular enemy you faced in Yakuza 6 and Shangri-La, Hangman. You face him once again in Judgment in a similar environment, a desolate love hotel. I don't know about you guys, but to me this was more of a, well, you know what? This makes total sense, rather than, oh, asset reuse, and so on and so forth. Now with the blatant and subtle asset reuse examples aside, let's talk about the general examples of them. Kamurocho between each engine is reused, maybe with slight alterations here and there, depending on whether they add new shops, or if there is anything relevant to the main story or the setting of the game, and that sort of thing. Minigames are also more than likely recycled. This one freaking hand PNG picture you see in Shogi in Yakuza Like a Dragon or Lost Judgment has been there since Yakuza 3, and so on. You get the idea by now. Sotaro Komaki. Komaki is an NPC that you first meet in the first Yakuza game after fighting in the underground Coliseum of Purgatory as part of the story. He approaches Kiryu, or well, you have to approach him actually, and he says that he sees potential in Kiryu and that he can make him a better fighter. And from there, Kiryu pretty much becomes a student of his. He teaches Kiryu many moves that actually help you a lot if you choose to undergo his training, one of which is the infamous Tiger Drop, which gained notoriety in the fanbase for being fairly overpowered in most games. You continue to see him going through the series, and he's always there to help Kiryu hone his fighting skills and teach him new things. When Yakuza 0 later came out, we learned that Majima met Komaki as well, but for one reason or another he was going by Somitaro Komaki at the time. In Yakuza 5, each of the playable characters can actually train with Komaki to help them with the limit break training, along with his grandson Sosuke Komaki. Unfortunately, Yakuza 5 is the last game we get to see him as far as I know, and what he's up to after that remains unexplored. Shinji, Ryuji, and Daigo in Yakuza 0. This is a pretty amusing one, and some great fanservice at that. I'm gonna start with Shinji. Shinji, who was only 16 at the time of Yakuza 0, attempts to attack Kiryu after mistaking him for a Yakuza because he grew a hatred for them for completely ruining his family. They took advantage of his father, who was in dire need for money, and extorted him for more. His mother ended up running away because she knew trouble was coming. His dad would get beat by those Yakuza members, and then he would take out all of his frustrations by beating Shinji. Until one day Shinji fought back, which sent his dad in a state of shock, that made him alcoholic. This is actually pretty freaking depressing when I lay it out like this, holy shit. Well anyway, some Yakuza members approach Kiryu later and tell him that they caught Shinji, and then after you beat the location out of them, you head there and beat the rest of them to rescue him, and now Shinji has someone to look up to. As for Ryuji, this one isn't nearly as tragic. Ryuji's going around stealing the pants of high schoolers, and Majima just so happens to see something like this, which is what eventually leads him to Ryuji. And get this, Ryuji is 12 in this game, and yet Majima, a 24-year-old, gets to fight him. And the fact that Ryuji has as much HP as some story bosses at this age is just hilarious to me. Lastly, Daigo's substory kind of strikes a balance between serious and humorous. Daigo is a 12-year-old boy in this game, and seeing as he's Dojima's son, Kiryu refers to him with Young Master, much like how Ichiban calls Masato Arakawa the same thing. The substory just kind of shows you how Daigo really wants to do all this growing up stuff that he shouldn't be doing yet, like drinking and just being the definition of a spoiled rich kid, until that kinda backfires and he gets kidnapped. And after rescuing him, Kiryu gives him a harsh lesson about learning to be more humble and nicer to people. Dead Souls. Yakuza Dead Souls is a spin-off that brings a zombie apocalypse to Kamurocho and pits 4 playable characters against it, namely Akiyama, Majima, Ryuji, and Kiryu. This would be the first time in release order we would be able to play as not only Majima, but Ryuji as well. Since Ryuji's in here with the rest of the boys, this means that this game's events aren't canon, or at the very least, they're in an alternate timeline where Ryuji didn't die at the end of Yakuza 2. Unfortunately, this game to this day remains a PlayStation 3 exclusive, and it's like the only localized entry that still didn't get a remaster. Here's hoping that'll change someday because it's really fun. Cut licensed songs. If you've been active in the community for at least a short amount of time, you may have come across what we're talking about. This actually isn't nearly as much of an issue anymore because, as we've established, releases have been getting more and more steady, release date-wise, but not only with that, but also with licensed songs. I unfortunately can't play any of them because copyright notices and all that. You can easily look them up on YouTube and enjoy them to their fullest. Now let me take you on a short trip of the most notable examples of cut songs in the series. Yakuza 3's intro in the Japanese release had a song that would become the first example of a cut song in the English release, whereas the soundtrack Fly is the one you hear in the English version. In the Japanese one, it's a song called Loser by Eikichi Yazawa. Yakuza 4's intro originally had a song by the name of Butterfly City by Zebra, and in the English release we got the instrumental version of For Faith. Yakuza 5's intro had a song by the name of Bloody Moon by Gospels of Judas. The English release replaced it with a brand new creation as far as I know. It's an unreleased track and was made specifically for the English release. You can find it on YouTube as well. Yakuza 6's intro, Yakuza 0's intro plays a song named Bubble by Shonen no Kaze, a band that RGG Studio would often work with and made several pieces with. The English piece, much like Yakuza 5, is actually a brand new one made specifically for the English release. Yakuza Kiwami's intro was originally a song named Bleed by Koshi Inaba. He also sung a reimagination of Receive You for the same game that was originally supposed to play in the last fight against Shimano, but that got replaced by Shimano's theme that you first hear in the funeral fight against him. And the English intro for Yakuza Kiwami brings the Vertical Point as a replacement. An obscure example I want to bring up is Yakuza Dead Souls' intro. That one just seems like it's long forgotten about, even though it's pretty damn good. The Japanese release had a song called Mutation made by Bradbury Orchestra, and then the English release had a custom one made for it like with Yakuza 5 and 0. Go on, give them a listen. These are examples of just the intro songs. There are instances such as credit songs and even more fight songs like the Shimano example that unfortunately fell into the same boat. There's an entire Reddit post by user potato_nugget1 dedicated to listing these. I'll post the link in the description if you want to take a look. It's definitely worth checking out if you want to discover more amazing songs if you don't already know about them. Okay, so the next entry has to do with Ishin and Kenzan, and I was thinking of updating the entry now that, but I'm gonna keep it. You'll see why. Ishin and Kenzan. Ishin and Kenzan are spin-offs for Yakuza set hundreds of years before the events of the main series. Kenzan takes place all the way back in the Edo period of Japanese history, specifically in 1602 in Kyoto, while Ishin is set in the Bakumatsu period that ran between 1853 and 1867, with the game's events happening in the Tosa domain. Both games feature prominent figures of Japanese history, such as their playable characters. In Kenzan, you play as swordsman Miyamoto Musashi, while Ishin has you play as Sakamoto Ryoma. These games have this thing where many characters, usually prominent figures, have the faces of characters from the mainline series. So the protagonists you play as have Kiryu's face, for example, which makes it look like one big budget movie with a cast of characters we're already mostly familiar with. These games have unfortunately never been localized, and people have been asking for them for years on end. Never been localized, he says. Get a load of this fucking idiot. But if you're dedicated enough and still want to play the games, you will find guides that will help you a lot in both, understanding the story as well as beating the game. If you don't want to get the games and want to watch them in a TV series kind of way, you should definitely check out KHH Sub's video translations for the story on YouTube. They've done a tremendous job at making everything understandable for anyone that doesn't understand Japanese. Kiryu and Ichiban parallels. There's simply too many things about Ichiban's story that are way too similar to how Kiryu's first game was. For starters, they both have a boss that they owe their lives to and look up to very much. Not long after the beginning, they end up taking the fall for a crime that they didn't commit, so that someone else could get away with it. This someone else just so happens to be a brother figure in both cases. Kiryu and Ichiban spend a long time in jail. Kiryu spends 10 years while Ichiban spends 18 years. After they get out, they find out that their brother figures have done some crazy shit that they shouldn't have done, and now the journey to set things straight with them begins. Kiryu meets Date, a detective that would end up being a lifelong friend, while Ichiban meets Adachi, an ex-detective, and the two become friends as well. The color of Ichiban's suit is an inversion of Kiryu's suit color. I could go on for so much longer talking about all these similarities, but you get the idea. Akiyama in Yakuza 1. Let me start off by saying Akiyama isn't actually in Yakuza 1. This is mostly a missed opportunity that fans talked about. When you find out more about Akiyama in Yakuza 4, you learn that Kiryu is a hero to him, because the Millennium Tower explosion in 1 was what helped Akiyama go from rags to riches. They show us a cutscene in 4 as well, where you can see him as a homeless man at the time, waking up and being a witness to the explosion, and then proceeding to loot as much money as he could. Let me give you a bit of context first for what's going on. In the ending of the first game on the PS2, there's a particular homeless man they focused the camera on as the money had just started to rain. Akiyama was still not a thing in the series yet, so naturally this is just a random homeless guy passing by here. Now in the ending of the remake of the first game, Yakuza Kiwami, they show the same homeless man, but what got fans talking is how cool it would have been if they retconned it into Akiyama being this guy instead, which was likely going to make a lot of people go, "Ah, now that's a familiar face." Sent to America. This is a half meme, but there is some truth to it. It originates from Kaoru Sayama, a character in Yakuza 2, deciding to go to the US for her career after the events of that game. And you get to see her at the beginning of Yakuza 3 before she takes off. And after that, well, you never see her ever again in any game after that. But hey, she does send you text messages in 3 whenever you finish a completion category to congratulate you. That's nice, right? There's plenty of other characters in the series that were written off despite not being killed off or anything of the sort. A perfect example would be Yayoi Dojima from 2, who you'd think would definitely make an appearance after that game because Daigo, her son, is involved in every game afterwards. But guess what? Nope. Other examples include Joji Kazuma from 3, the long-lost twin brother of Kiryu's father figure, who again, because of that, you'd think he'd appear sometime later, but he doesn't. Then there's the florist, who never shows up again after 5. Thanks to Kaoru, whenever people now discuss or talk about any character's whereabouts, you'll usually find someone joking about being sent off to America, where Kaoru herself was sent to and subsequently written off. Rubber bullets. Another meme that came to life thanks to an infamous plot point in Yakuza 4. While playing through the game, you watch one of the playable characters, Taiga Saejima, raid a restaurant that had a rival Yakuza family in it at the time and massacre all 18 people there. So he clearly had the intent of murdering everyone there, but well, the game eventually says, hey, those were rubber bullets and everyone in there didn't actually die. And Sayajima is innocent. Woohoo! Secret Koreans. This is a joke about Yakuza 2's love of having X character turn out to be the descendant of the Korean Jingwon Mafia. There are a total of 4 characters who are guilty of this. Furuhashi, Daijin Kim, Kaoru, and of course, Ryuji. Alright fellas, with the tip tier all done, we'll now move on to the third tier, the upper body of the iceberg, containing information that you're probably familiar with if you've been a fan for at least a few months. Majima and Park. So Majima and Park probably aren't everyone's favorite video game couple, or I should probably say ex-couple, and it's not difficult to see why this is such a controversial piece of the story when you know the details. You find out towards the end of Yakuza 5 that Park and Majima were married at one point, but things didn't work out for them because Park was an idol at the time. In Japan, generally speaking, idols are supposed to be the spitting image of cuteness and purity. So if word got out that they were involved romantically with someone, much less a Yakuza, that is really bad for them. Let me explain why. I won't be mentioning the name out of respect, but a real-life idol was forced to shave her head on camera, and was also forced to apologize after it came to light that she had a boyfriend. From what I looked up, the villain of this story is her agency, as fans and notable people were on her side. Calling this a harsh act on the agency's part is underselling it. Back to Majima and Park, the two were romantically involved, which was of course kept under wraps. But then Park also gets pregnant with Majima's child and she aborts the child to continue her career, which, upon finding out, Majima hit her. Not a very comforting story. Majima thought he wasn't doing the relationship any favors, so they had a divorce. Her agency found out about their marriage after that and, well, let's just say she had to quit the industry eventually. Sub-stories are canon. It's pretty easy to think or go with the assumption that sub-stories are probably just some goofy stuff that happened because it's funny to see characters being put into ridiculous situations, and therefore they probably don't have any kind of relevance to the story at all. However, there have been instances in the main story where characters mention events that happened to them in sub-stories. One example includes a scene in Yakuza 6 where Kiryu is changing Haruto's diapers after arriving in Hiroshima. While doing so, Haruto almost pees at Kiryu, but he swiftly blocks it with a diaper and says that he's not falling for that again. This is a reference to a sub-story in Yakuza 4 where an immigrant mother is trying to keep her baby safe from a bunch of threatening men going after her. Data hears the baby and takes him in, and after forcefully pushing the crying baby onto Kiryu, Kiryu attempts to change his diapers to hopefully stop him from crying. While doing so, the baby lets out a big one, and everyone in the room is absolutely baffled. Good on you for learning, Kiryu! The original Tanimura. Masayoshi Tanimura is one of the 4 playable characters in Yakuza 4. A Kamurocho cop who isn't afraid to slack on the job, accept briberies and gamble through mahjong. In the order of the characters you play as, he is the 3rd. In the remastered release, he is voiced by Toshiki Masuda, and as far as I know, Tanimura in this release is not modeled after anyone and is using an original face. Please do correct me on that if I'm mistaken. In the original release on the PS3 though, Tanimura was voiced by Hiroki Narimiya, and was modeled to look after him as well. I don't want to get too much into it at this point because it's probably something that the original actor wants to forget, and I don't want to make it seem like, oh, did you know this scandalous, spicy thing happened kind of topic. But I do want to explain it from an educational point of view, especially given that this man was actually innocent. And he wrongfully had it very rough, and I do think that at least deserves to come to light. Sometime after the release of Yakuza 4, Narimiya was accused of drug abuse. Cocaine specifically. What Narimiya got following that was everyone in the industry basically turning their backs on him and falling for it. What actually happened was a close friend of Narimiya went to sell this cocaine story to the press, which makes this whole situation more devastating to think about. There's a Reddit post by the user The Mad Bloke that has a lot of information on this, so if you're interested in the full story, I'll be leaving the link to that in the description. Yakuza movie. In 2007, a movie by the name of Ryuga Gotoku Gekijouban, which translates to Like a Dragon the Movie, was released. It was directed by Takeshi Miike, who directed many Yakuza-themed movies such as Crows Zero, which stars actor Shin Oguri, who played Somiya in Yakuza 6, and something like Dead or Alive, which starred Riki Takeuchi, who played Amano in Yakuza 0. And it goes without saying, but no, this is not the same Dead or Alive fighting game you're thinking of. Anyway, Like a Dragon explores the events of the first Yakuza game, and it mostly has the same foundation, but there are some things that are different from how the story plays out in the game. For example, Majima has a much bigger role here. You see him actively hunting Kiryu more than he did in the original game. I say original game here specifically because of course Yakuza Kiwami was not a thing back then. And the same goes for the Majima Everywhere system that was implemented in the remake. He also wears the eye patch on the wrong guy. The full movie is actually available on YouTube, so you can check it out anytime you'd like. Yakuza 0 Fortune Teller. This is a sub-story in Yakuza 0 that serves as a pretty amusing fan service. You meet a fortune teller next to Champion's District who claims to be able to see into Kiryu's future. There are three main things that she will tell you about: his future, his family, and his career. When choosing his future, he asks her to tell him about what's going to happen in 10 years from now, to which she says he will shoulder a heavy blame for someone else. And as you know, that's exactly what happens in Yakuza 1 when Kiryu takes the fall for Nishiki for shooting Dojima. She also mentions the word Millennium in reference to the Millennium Tower that did not exist in this game. When you choose the family option, she brings up wrestling a viper in Okinawa, in reference to the mock battle that Kiryu has with Rikiya at the orphanage. Then she says there will be a child that trusts him deeply. This, of course, is Haruka. Then she drops what is a bomb to Kiryu at the time, saying he'll raise 8 kids, which Kiryu absolutely refuses to even imagine. But we all know the truth. When choosing to know about his career, she brings up the city of Fukuoka and being a taxi driver, and this is indeed what he does and where he would go in Yakuza 5. Lastly, as Kiryu is leaving, she tells him that he will be bumping into a young man, and their fates will have them meet sometime down the line. And what do you know? Kiryu bumps into Kid Ryuji. Yakuza 1 dub. The very first Yakuza game on the PS2 had a fully voiced dub featuring pretty renowned actors doing the voice work. Those who are already familiar with this will probably think of Mark Hamill as Majima first. And then there is Michael Madsen as Shimano, Bill Farmer aka Goofy as Date, Debbie Derryberry aka Jimmy Neutron as Haruka, and so on and so forth. The dub was notorious for dropping F-bombs with almost every chance they can get.
The fuck you think you're doing? Just what the fuck family are you from?
And has some glaring syncing issues that stand out.
Go! Kill this arrogant motherfucker!
Hey! Kill this dumb motherfucker!
And this may have been something that fans have looked down upon once upon a time, but by now it's one of those things that are charmingly bad and people will likely just see it as endearing. It was probably for that negative reception that no other Yakuza game got a dub until Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise decided to have dual audio. Most likely because demand for dubs has increased with how dubs have been improving over the years. Aside from Lost Paradise, the next quote-unquote Yakuza game to have dubs was Judgment, Lost Judgment, and then there's also Yakuza Like a Dragon, in which they brought back Daryl Kurillo, who was Kiryu's original dub voice actor, as well as Bill Farmer for Date. And I always thought that was so cool how they managed to get them back on board.
I'm gonna ask you one more time. Where's the girl?
Stop! Stop!
Where is she? Where is Haruka?
The treasure you're after is right up there. I'm the dragon guarding it. So defeat me, if you really think you're the hero it belongs to. You're going down! Come at me then!
When you're someone who played Yakuza 1 back in the day and then you hear Daryl speak once again as Kiryu after all those years, it just hits different, man. And since Lost Judgment also has dual audio, it seems that it might be a normal thing going forward. Kiryu's scrapped Yakuza 6 outfit. Before we got Yakuza 6 the way we all know it now, Kiryu was intended, or at least planned, to have this outfit on during the events of the game at some point. It's one of the more casual outfits we've ever seen Kiryu don, and I do think it's a shame that this is not even an unlockable that you end up getting, because I think it looks sick and it does fit Kiryu pretty well. However, thanks to modders, you're able to use this outfit if you'd like, since the outfit is still in the game files. Kashiwagi is alive. In Yakuza Like a Dragon, as you progress with the story, you end up frequenting a bar that ends up becoming a hideout. The bar in question is called Survive Bar. If the man behind the counter there seems familiar, then you're not imagining things. Your hunch is most likely correct if you play through Yakuza 1 to 3. That man, of course, is none other than Kashiwagi, alive and well. His face and the distinguishing scar he has should be enough, or at least close enough proof of that. But there's a bit more to it if you want to make extra sure. In one of the sub-stories of the game called The Lone Survivor, 5 different women that you can romance will gang up on you and beat you if you successfully romance all 5 of them. After being beat up, the bartender will offer each one a free drink and tell him that he knows when a man's been through hell. And then he goes on to say that at one point in the past he was attacked by a helicopter, and doctors said he wouldn't pull through, but he miraculously did. He also says that he named this bar Survive to remind himself of how precious life is. With all of that aside, can we just talk about how fucking ridiculous Ryuji's spin-off leak? In January of 2021, a couple of very interesting screenshots emerged online seemingly from 4chan. These screenshots show Ryuji in a tank top, and tagging along with him is Jungi-han. To most people, this may be completely random, but whether or not this is real, this is based on the Ryuji story that is exclusive to RGG Online and was confirmed canon, where he does meet Jungi-han and ends up going to Onomichi, which is the city shown in the screenshots as far as I can tell. The costumes are also on point with how they look in RGG Online. However, at this point it's been over a year since these screenshots surfaced, so there's a good chance it's a very elaborate fake, but who knows. We have a small update as I'm revisiting this entry after the Yakuza 8 sneak peek. There are rumors going around now saying that Ryuji will possibly return to Yakuza 8 and that's what the screenshots are about, but only time will tell. Kuroda and Nagoshi in Yakuza 5. In Yakuza 5, there are 2 NPCs that have a striking resemblance to both Takaya Kuroda and Toshihiro Nagoshi. If you're unfamiliar with who they are, Takaya Kuroda is the voice actor for Kiryu, while Toshihiro Nagoshi was the general director of the series for a long time, until his recent departure. In Yakuza 5, there are special street fights that lead you to being chosen to be able to enter the underground Coliseum in Kamurocho. The guy who approaches you for that is this guy. Though after a bit of research in a Reddit thread about this, user Jason Alp said that Yokoyama said that it's not supposed to be Kuroda, and he links to a tweet saying so. As for Nagoshi, the character in question is Nakai, the manager of T-Set, who are Haruka's rivals in the Princess League competition. Upon visiting the link provided by the user, you'll see a tweet asking about whether or not this is intentional for both Kuroda and Nagoshi, and according to series writer Yokoyama, this was not intentional at all. Akira Yamaoka. When you first hear this name, the first thing that will most likely come into your mind is the composer of the Silent Hill games. This, however, is not who we're talking about in this entry. There is a character that you can fight in the underground Coliseum in Purgatory with this name. He wears a white suit and a fedora, and in most games he is one of the tougher opponents in there. Whether or not this is an intentional nod of some sorts to the Silent Hill composer, I don't know, and I couldn't find anything that would suggest so. Watase spin-off. In November of 2020, this screenshot depicting a younger Watase with a logo that says Asura ga Gotoku, or like an Asura, surfaced online. Asura refers to the tattoo on Watase's back depicting an Asura king. This leak comes off as more legit than the Ryuji one because the images were tweeted by none other than Yokoyama, a key writer for the Yakuza series and is now the executive producer and director of RGG Studio. The tweet was deleted not long after, which sparked even more talk about this potential spin-off, but Yokoyama later went on to deny the existence of such a game. An article by thegamer.com does mention that he was amused by being the subject of a Western rumor, so maybe the guy was just doing a little trolling after all, who knows. Fuma. Before Shintaro Kazama was known as such in the English releases, the localized releases for Yakuza 1, 2, and 3 would call him Shintaro Fuma instead, and by proxy, Joji Kazama was Joji Fuma. In Japanese, the readings for kanji can be multiple. Kunyomi is the Japanese reading for them, and Onyomi is the Chinese reading. And in this case, the kanji that says Kazama can also be read Fuma. Kazama is the Kunyomi reading, while Fuma is the Onyomi reading. According to posts I found online, this decision was made to avoid potential confusion between Kazuma and Kazuma Kiryu. They decided to go back with Kazuma, starting with Yakuza 5, which you can see in this scene. Arase in Yakuza 3. Kazuto Arase is a villain that you fight in Yakuza 1 or Yakuza Kiwami. He was working under Nishiki and he's responsible for the deaths of Reina, and you could probably lump in Shinji's death in there too. After you defeat him, you never really learn what happens to him. We didn't see him die in any way, so where has he been and why did he not make a return in Yakuza 2 or 3 where the Nishikiyama family showed up again and you had to fight them again? Well, in Yakuza 3 you're able to see him again, but not in the main story. About halfway into the game, you're introduced to Hitman missions, where the Honest Living Association, an organization founded by Kashiwagi, keeps sending you to hitmen so that you try to persuade them into leaving behind what they do for a more honest living. The last Hitman mission takes you to the top of the Millennium Tower where you get to fight their leader, who turns out to be Arase. He explains what he's been up to and how he wants to take revenge on Kiryu because ever since their fight in 1, he's been disowned by the family for his failure and goes on about how his life became a living hell ever since. After the fight, it's hard to say all is well and forgiven, but basically Arase's mind is more at peace, knowing that the HLA and Kashiwagi tried pretty hard to get him to join them and start anew and put his skills to good use. Arase gets on good terms with the HLA but tells Kiryu that he still hasn't forgiven him. He gets a cool remix of his original track called Endpoint, and I just think it's cool that they went ahead and put in that effort for him. Yakuza and Mafia City collab. This is referring to a collaboration event that Mafia City held in which it brought a Yakuza event and characters. This was initially going to be a tier or 2 lower, but because it had a rerun at some point, this is the tier that it sits at. Mafia City is a mobile simulation game that is mostly known for the "That's how Mafia works" meme that exploded some time back. Being that it is what most people would consider a generic mobile game, you can imagine how surprised the Yakuza fans were when word got around that this collaboration was a thing, and that it's official and not just a case of a mobile game stealing assets. I even made a video talking about the collaboration when it happened, and I'll leave the link for that in the description if you're interested. But long story short, this was so official that there were big ads plastered around places in Japan, and yeah, probably not something you'd ever expect to see happening. Kuroyo. Kuroyo, also known as Black Panther, is a spin-off of Yakuza that is exclusive to the PlayStation Portable. There are 2 Kuroyo games that tell the story of Ukiyo Tatsuya, a violent teenager that ends up being framed for a crime that he did not commit in the first game. Damn, why does that sound familiar? The game takes place in Kamurocho only in the first game, and then the second game also adds Sotenburi in addition to Kamurocho. Kuroyo takes place in 2010 in the Yakuza canon, while 2 takes place in 2012. The games are comparable to the Judgment games in the sense that Judgment has you see Kamurocho from a detective's viewpoint, while Kuroyo has you see it from a teenager's perspective. This game unfortunately never saw the light of day outside of Japan. However, if you look around, you'll find English patches that will allow you to enjoy the games to their fullest. Goodfellas. Kiryu's voice actor, Takaya Kuroda, is not exclusively a voice actor. He has his own rock band, which he is the lead singer of. The band is known as Takaya Kuroda and Goodfellas. There's plenty of their music on YouTube, so go check them out if you ever found yourself falling in love with Kiryu's karaoke singing and wanted more. Kiwami 2 cut content. Yakuza Kiwami 2 is the remake of the second entry in the series, Yakuza 2, which was originally released for the PS2. Between the 2 versions, there are several things that were either altered or were left out entirely out of the remake. One of the biggest things that was removed is a third area known as Shinseicho. In Chapter 11 of the original, the game takes you to this area for a very specific objective, and as far as I know, you never return to it again. In Kiwami 2, this objective is done in Sotenburi instead. Another thing removed is Club Adam, a host club substory, where Kiryu could become a host and has to keep customers company. Smaller differences include changes of boss music such as Hayashi not having his own boss theme, and Shindo getting a brand new track different from the original. Fists of the North Star Lost Paradise Parallels. I was tempted to just include this at the entry where I talked about Lost Paradise, but I feel like it deserves its own entry because I just find it so cool and I'm not sure how many people know about this. The Japanese cast of Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise is mostly comprised of voice actors that voiced characters in the Yakuza games. The one that most people are probably already familiar with is Kenshiro being voiced by Takaya Kuroda, who's the voice of Kiryu. But let's get this one out of the way and look at others. Shin is voiced by Kazuhiro Nakaya, Nishiki and Ichiban's voice actor. Yuria is voiced by Aya Hisakawa, Kaoru's voice actress. Kisana is voiced by Miyuki Sawashiro, the voice of Makoto. Jagre is voiced by Kenta Miyake, the voice of Yuya. Toki is voiced by Shunsuke Sakuya, the voice of Kashiwagi. Rei is voiced by Toshiyuki Morikawa, the voice of Shinada. Ren is voiced by Rii Kogimiya, the voice of Haruka. Rao is voiced by Masami Iwasaki, the voice of Ryuji. Jagi is voiced by Hidenari Ugaki, the voice of Majima. Targa is voiced by Yuichi Nakamura, the voice of Jungihan, and so on. Being that Lost Paradise is a collaboration title between Yakuza and Fist of the North Star, I just find all of this very cool. Today is a diamond's double meaning. If it were about a few years ago, this probably would have been further down in the iceberg, but from what I've seen recently, more and more people have been aware about this one. Today is a Diamond is a karaoke song introduced in an exclusive to Yakuza 6, and it's pretty intriguing. The song has a very bright and upbeat tone and imagery, and if you don't know the lyrics, you couldn't guess that they are kinda depressing. This is a song where for the majority of it, the speaker is begging someone dear to him to wake up, so that the two could spend some time together. On a deeper level, waking up here isn't necessarily waking up from sleep per se, but from death or a state similar enough. For the longest time, I thought this is an allegory where Kiryu wishes for Haruka to be up and about, to spend time with him again, considering the game it's in. The karaoke songs in Yakuza games typically cut down the songs to about half length, so that means you don't get to hear all of the lyrics, and the only exception to that rule is a song called Hands, which is also exclusive to Yakuza 6. The Haruka theory is fine when you take into account only the game version of the song, though when you listen to the full version, that's another story. Now, the translation I'll be going with is from a dear friend of mine, the Mike, who's done plenty of karaoke song translations on his channel, so go check him out if they're your thing. There's one line later on that indicates he's speaking to a love interest and not just any other dear person. That line is, "Because I'll flirt with you like a grown man." So obviously this rules out the Haruka allegory theory, but there's a line right before that where he makes it seem like he's singing about Yumi as the love interest with a mention to Haruka being with them on this vacation, saying, "Together with our dear one." The cherry on top is when the last line of the song is just, "Maybe I should sleep too," where he contemplates joining them. So I guess for now I'm going with the Yumi and Haruka theory. Haunted Prince Circle. In Yakuza 5, when playing as Akiyama, you may come across a couple of high school girls talking about a haunted Prince Circle machine at Club Sega in Sotenbori. They say that when you take a picture there, a ghost may show up behind you. When you play along, you'll see that a guy with a ghost face looking mask photobomb your picture. Akiyama chases after this guy, and when you capture him, he'll apologize for pulling this prank and compensate you. He says he's been doing this just to scare people and have them get their money's worth. He takes off his mask and you get a good look at his face. You run into the same schoolgirls later, and you talk to them about the ghost. They show you a picture of the Prince Circle ghost, and what do you know? It's the same guy you've just spoken to, but without the mask. Akiyama says that he just chased this guy down and got him to stop, which shocks the girls because they tell him that this guy was dead for 3 years. During one of his pranks, someone got pissed at him, chasing him all over town, and he ended up being run over by a car. Akiyama, understandably, has a moment of existential crisis, and the sub-story ends shortly after. Now, the sub-story is great and all, but this makes us ask the obvious. Is this supposed to mean that ghosts exist in the Yakuza universe? More than likely, as this is not the only ghost sub-story in the series. And I don't know about you guys, but I love to see this kind of thing every now and then. Just an unexpected touch of unnerving in a series full of goofy sub-stories. Curse Tape. This is a sub-story in Yakuza 2/Kiwami 2 in which you meet a frantic man near Champion's District. The sub-story, interestingly enough, does differ a little bit between the original and the Kiwami version, so I will be talking about the differences as we go. The man passes a videotape onto you and hurriedly takes off after doing so. Now in the original, he emphasizes to you again and again that you should avoid watching it at all costs. But in the Kiwami version, he gets into a state of hysteria and tells you that you should watch it because it totally has some 18+ fun stuff, bro, trust me. After taking the tape and attempting to watch it, Kiryu finds himself watching this. Upon heading out, an old man approaches you and tells you that he can sense wicked spirits around Kiryu, and tells you that he can perform an exorcism for a sum of money. Up until now, most of what happens is very similar in both versions, except for some of what the terrified man who gives you the tape has to say. From here on though, it's gonna be a little more different, so I'll be talking about how it goes in the original first. You're able to either pay the man or choose not to pay. Paying will have him perform a half-assed exorcism, and then he just tells you that it's all done and he buzzes off, prematurely ending the sub-story. If you go to the sub-story tab, Kiryu's just like, huh, I think I got scammed. You don't say, buddy. Not paying will have the old man say that there will be a terrible fate waiting for you. Now, as you walk away, going near where you met the first guy will trigger an event where Kiryu says he feels like someone is watching him. And there she is, the lady in red from the videotape, just stalking you. Let's talk about this fucking camera angle for a bit, okay? This right here is Uncanny Valley because you never see this kind of angle in at least most of this game during a conversation. Upon following her to the turn that she takes, you see that she vanished, and you find a message saying that they'll be waiting at a certain place. When you go there, you get jumped by a bunch of men in masks. After defeating them, it's revealed that one of them was the exorcist from before. Kiryu says that he didn't expect for that woman to also be in on the whole scam, and that's when the old dude strikes with the heebie-jeebies by saying, "What woman?" He admits that he came here because he got tipped off by an acquaintance of his that a rich guy would be coming here. He gives you some money as compensation for all the trouble, and the sub-story ends there with Kiryu wondering who the woman was. So with the original, we never see her again after the first time seeing her outside of the tape. Now let's talk about how Kiwami 2 handled things from when the exorcist asks you to pay up. Unlike the original, with Kiwami 2 you're unable to say no to the payment in this particular part. So he asks you to meet him at a certain place once you have the money. You also meet the terrified man from the beginning, and he asks you if you watched the tape. Kiryu says he did, to which the guy thanks you for it and says he's finally free from the curse. In the original, you don't see this guy again after the first time. Once you scrounge up the amount needed, heading near the specified location will show you a scene similar to the one we see in the original, where the ghost lady is standing in the middle of the road looking at you. You follow her and she vanishes at the turn that she takes. But instead of finding a message like you did in the original, the exorcist approaches you right after you lose her, and it's here that you have the option of paying or not paying. But if you choose not to pay, the sub-story remains on hold until you pay up. So you have to do it. Once you pay up, he does some chanting on you and then offers an alleged blessed stone for 300,000 yen. And then he also adds that he needs an extra 500,000 yen to charge it. The fuck is this, an iPhone 14 Pro Max? Right after that though, the exorcist himself sees the ghost lady behind Kiryu, and all of his act falls apart, admitting everything on the spot and returning your money before running like hell. We see the ghost lady about to touch Kiryu, but right then he drops the tape, breaking it, and she disappears. and the sub-story ends there. In other words, his clumsiness might have saved his life right in that moment. Now that we've talked about both versions, let's discuss a few things. In the original version, who the hell left that message telling Kiryu to go to where he fought the Exorcist? If it was the ghost lady, was it her trying to save Kiryu from the scam? Because we know that she wasn't a normal human involved in the scam, so that rules out the possibility of her doing it for that. And if it was the Exorcist, why would he leave a message in a random corner of the city which Kiryu normally wouldn't even think of going to? The part about the message remains a mystery still, and also the fact that the ghost never appears after the part where Kiryu follows her just makes the sub-story very vague. Though having said that, this vague nature of it might just be a good thing because it leaves you wondering about what the fuck just happened and why did it happen, which in itself is spooky, especially considering that this is like one horror-themed sub-story among like 120 plus sub-stories that are either goofy or just scam ones. Also, going back to the Kiwami 2 version, I do wonder if it was Kiryu being clumsy with dropping the tape, or if the ghost was the one who wanted to rid him of the curse. Though I guess the ghost of all people wanting to save someone from the curse doesn't make sense. Alright folks, attention please. It's break time. I want to have this little segment to talk to you, not just as a YouTuber to a viewer, but as a Yakuza fan to a fellow Yakuza fan. Heck, maybe you're not even a big Yakuza fan or a Yakuza fan at all. But the point is, you're here right now, talking to me or listening to me. So how's your day? Come on now, don't be shy, tell me. Listen, if no one else told you this, I will do it. Keep being you, don't listen to anybody trying to ruin your day. I got you, buddy. So, I wanted to take the chance to talk about why it took so long to make this video. There was a point of time where I had pretty much every cutscene recorded for at least most of the Yakuza games. But then the PC versions of these games started rolling out, and basically what that meant is, with the PC versions coming out, those are now the more superior versions when it comes to quality and just better performance overall. So I went ahead and deleted most of my old footage, because it would be better as a content creator to have the higher quality footage. You follow me so far? So what that meant for this video is basically I had to record like a terabyte of footage, and there is still more to come, because I still haven't re-recorded the cutscenes for every Yakuza game, but I am planning to do that, because having those stored on my hard drive will be a big help for future videos, where instead of going back and recording cutscenes again and again for future videos, I would have most of the footage just stored, and I can use it whenever I want to make a new video. That doesn't mean that if I record cutscenes for every Yakuza game that I'm not gonna need to record ever again. Obviously, there will be like exceptions where I would need to record specific things like minigames or combat or, you know, that kind of thing. Researching topics and also looking into multiple sources to verify their validity is also important, and it is required, especially for a video that is an Iceberg video. Also, I am a one-person channel. I do all the work by myself, and that includes the editing, recording, the researching, everything really. And I know there's channels out there that have their own editors, and I did consider getting an editor at some point, but honestly, I might prefer just doing everything on my own, because if I leave it to others, I feel like that's gonna eventually create some kind of disconnect where they might do something that I would prefer to do another way, you know, that kind of thing. Maybe it is a very minor, like, dumb nitpick, but you know, for the time being, I guess I'll just do everything on my own to make sure that things come out the way I want them to, really, more than anything. But yeah, these are all things that I wanted to take the time to talk to you about it, because I do feel it's important for me to have communication with you guys. Not just to have a little chat between me and you, but also to inform people of how I work on my videos. You know what I mean? But yeah, with all of this being said, this is the end of the break segment. Let's get back into it. Alright friends, we've now reached the end of the third tier, and tier 4 is where things will start getting a little bit obscure. Just a little. Original Man in Black. Man in Black is a genuine Mafia member that you fight multiple times through the course of the main story of Yakuza 2 and Kiwami 2. Most people who play through Kiwami 2 will tell you that the most annoying enemy they've ever faced in all of the game is Man in Black. Just go to my Kiwami 2 abandoned building video and look at the comments. People are relieved that they're not the only ones who struggled with this man. The main reason for this is, after dealing enough damage, he will unsheath knives from his boots. And he can't do anything against the knife boots except eat shit. Blocking means nothing with them, so you have to be super careful and time your attacks with him. Now let's talk about the original Man in Black. In the original version of the game, you may be surprised to know that Man in Black is nowhere near as annoying as he is in Kiwami 2. This is mainly because he doesn't have his knife boots in the original. It's an odd change between the original and the remake, but an interesting one. You just have to wonder why they picked him specifically to give you a harder time. How do you guys feel about this buff to him in the remake? Yakuza 6 Ghost Photographs. In Yakuza 6, you may come across images of characters from past games dropped on the ground. Upon taking them and taking a picture nearby, a ghost will appear somewhere in the picture you've just taken. These ghosts are mostly characters that have passed away in previous games, such as Kazama and Nishiki. This could be just a fun thing that they added for the player to hunt and find them all, or it could also be them further pushing us to believe that ghosts do exist in this universe. Ichiban has schizophrenia. Many people seem to either joke about or genuinely believe that Ichiban suffers from schizophrenia. This is mainly because of how he views all fights he falls into as a JRPG battle because of his love of Dragon Quest. All of the things you see in Yakuza 7's combat, such as all the different class outfits, the absurd class weapons, and the moves that you do, obviously aren't real in the game's universe, because it all shows up only as soon as you go into a fight. Not to mention all the ridiculous outfits you see the enemies wear only in combat. If you look this up, you'll find people poking fun at it, but you'll also find people that go in depth about how this could be a real thing that Ichiban has, and why he may have it. Could be a trauma that the guy has, or it could just be his simple, childlike state of mind. Who knows? Though honestly, if we want to go that in-depth about it and you want to ask me about it, we could kind of tie in all the other protagonists into this, as in all of the other games, you pull off things that are superhuman and obviously aren't realistic by any stretch of the imagination. I think this is one of those things that people might be overthinking, because at the end of the day, we are playing a game, and the ridiculousness of any game's combat never really gets a spotlight mention in the story, except maybe for Ichiban, of course. Japan retailer exclusives. I have a very iffy relationship with this one as a collector, or at least I used to. Some Yakuza games in Japan have special retailer exclusive editions that are only available at certain stores, and the goodies that come with them are very limited and you likely won't see them being released elsewhere. Let's have a look at an example with the Japanese release of Kiwami 2. If you pre-ordered the game through Amazon Japan, you would get this PS4 theme. Amazon Japan also had another edition that included these two pins of the Omi and Goryu clans. Jago had an exclusive steelbook that looks like this. Koshin Electric gave you a phone wallpaper. Game Tsutaya gave you a Majima construction cleaning cloth. Family Mart gave you Omi and Tojo pins. Yamada Denki gave you a Majima mousepad. Rakuten Books gave you Ryuji's tattoo, although I'm not sure if this was supposed to be one of those temporary tattoos or a poster. Wonder Goo had a teacup. Sega Store had two different packs, one that gave you a Majima phone case with a Majima plate and an art card, and the Majima set had all of those three plus a Majima karaoke CD. So by now you probably see my problem with this. I do think it's wonderful that there's all these different pieces of collectibles, but at the same time, if you're a big fan and you want to get multiple or as many of these as possible, it's a nightmare having a dozen different editions that you'll have to get to be able to secure all of them. Laogui bug. When Yakuza 0 was first released in English, Laogui had an audio bug that made him sound different when you were to fight him at the end of the game. His audio was perfectly fine prior to the fight and after the fight as well. It was only when you fought him that he'd have Sam Lee's audio instead. I happened to have this recorded during my fight against him back when the game came out. Have a listen.
去死吧！你只是白费力气。上！让我把你双眼挖出来呀！再有点气了，真是个顽固的家伙。
This was a launch bug that thankfully did not take long to be fixed. If you're interested in seeing more of the video, I will leave the link in the description. Playable Date. In Yakuza Kiwami, there is a game mode known as Climax Battles, where you undergo different sets of challenges and have to achieve conditions in order to pass. In the Proving Grounds category, the 10th and last challenge has you play as a drunk-looking Date, and the condition is simple enough: beat all 3 goons in front of you. Date will have the brawler-style icon of Kiryu show up near the health bar, and I do kinda wish they messed with that a bit to add to the joke. Date's clunky fighting style makes it a bit tricky, but with some caution, you'll be able to do it no problem. Yakuza 3 cut content. You've heard about Kiwami 2 content, and now get ready for Yakuza 3 cut content. When we talk about Yakuza 3 here, we're mostly referring to the original release on the PS3, where, as far as my memory goes, this is the one localization that took out the most things out of any other releases. A total of 4 minigames were left out, and those were Answer X Answer, the Massage Parlor, Shogi, and Mahjong. You're probably familiar with all of those except the first one, which never made it in any English release as far as I know. So let me try to explain that one. Answer X Answer is basically a quiz kind of minigame in Club Sega, where you have to answer trivia questions about Japan in order to win. If you look it up, people online will say that it was taken out because it requires knowledge on Japanese history. Back to cut content, Hostess Clubs and the Hostess Maker minigame were also taken out, but the sub-stories for the hostesses were kept. And you may be wondering, well, how the hell does that work? How are the hostesses still in if the hostess clubs are out? See, I don't know why they thought this was a good idea, but instead of meeting hostesses at, well, hostess clubs, they were now scattered around different spots of the city, like restaurants, and you can just talk to one and immediately go on a date with her. Now, granted, as far as I remember, most of the stuff were cut because of time constraints, so there's that. Out of all the hostesses in the original Japanese release, one hostess was completely removed in the original English release, and a total of 22 sub-stories were also removed from the English release. So far, we've only been talking about the original release of Yakuza 3. Now let's talk about the remastered English version of Yakuza 3. The remaster restores almost everything that was gone. The exceptions are the Answer X Answer minigame once again, but this minigame was removed from all versions of this game this time around, even the Japanese release. 2 hostesses were replaced by Yui from Kiwami and Kana from Kiwami 2, and about 3 sub-stories were also removed across all releases. These 3 sub-stories are Michiru's sub-stories, which were controversial to say the least. The Michiru sub-stories are about one trans woman who keeps chasing after Kiryu, and Kiryu keeps trying to stay away. The Michiru sub-stories were actually available on the original English releases on the PS3, and if you look them up, you'll be able to find footage of them as well. With the remasters though, they deemed the sub-stories inappropriate and took them out. Judgment Sadako. In Judgment, you get a request to investigate a haunted apartment, and then you come across her. Sadly, this is nothing supernatural, as you will soon find out. The quote-unquote ghost starts running away, you give chase, and then you find out that it was just a costume. The reason she was doing all this is so that it could be proven to the landlord that the apartment is haunted, so that her and her boyfriend can get cheap rent. Takashima and Kei Ibuchi. If you've seen Takashima in the original Yakuza 2, you may have been surprised to see how he looked like in Kiwami 2. But if you haven't seen the original Takashima, here's the 2 of them side by side. With Kiwami 2 in particular, they decided to have him look like his voice actor, Hakuryu. The original Takashima somewhat bears a resemblance to Kei Ibuchi from the Majima saga in Kiwami 2, which makes me wonder if that model was supposed to be Takashima at one point, but perhaps a change of plans happened. I couldn't find anything official about this, however. Akiyama Thug Lookalike. In the ending of Yakuza 0, there was one thug that always stood out to me. I'm pretty sure this is just Akiyama's head with heavy adjustments done to it on a Yakuza suit. At the very least, I know for sure that the hair is the exact same hair but just blonde. Chalk this one up to asset reuse. Mark Hamill interview. There is a 1-minute clip that you can find on YouTube of Mark Hamill doing voice work for Majima for the first Yakuza game. This was uploaded a whole 14 years ago. Yakuza-themed consoles. There were several consoles themed after Yakuza that were released, and all of them being exclusive to Japan. I won't be including bundles like the Kenzan one, as that one doesn't have any special patterns on it. What I'm talking about started with the Japanese release of Yakuza 3, which had Kiryu's tattoo on the console itself. And then there's the Yakuza 5 Super Slim PS3 that had several clan and family crests on it. It also had a sticker that you could put on the controller. And if I remember right, it also had this sick USB with preloaded Yakuza 5 wallpapers and also a towel. There was also a special release of the Vita that was themed after Yakuza 0, which had both Kiryu and Majima's tattoos on the back. It came in two colors, black and white. Every console release after this had the option of black or white. There were also Yakuza 0 PS4s with Majima and Kiryu's tattoos on them separately, and those also came in black and white colors each, so that's a total of 4 different versions. Kiwami had a PS4 themed after it as well, and it looked like this. The Yakuza 6 PS4 had Kiryu's tattoo on it, while the Kiwami 2 PS4 had Majima's tattoo on it. Lastly, we have the Hokuto ga Gotoku PS4, or Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise PS4, which looked like this, and I think this was only available in black. RGG Online. Ryu ga Gotoku Online, or Yakuza Online, is an official mobile gacha game for the Yakuza series. The main story focuses on Ichiban, but it is worth mentioning that his story in this game isn't exactly the same as we see in Like a Dragon. It has its differences, and this is one reason I wish we'll get to see this game in English one day, but I won't hold my breath for it. You're able to obtain many characters, dead or alive, create your own dream team and use them all in different modes available in this game. This game was released in November 2018 and it's still up and running to this day. Saejima toilet stall scene. So this isn't exactly something hidden as much as it is something that I find extremely weird. Just the uncanny valley kind of thing, you know? In one cutscene in Yakuza 4, Saejima attempts to enter Purgatory through the bathroom entrance, only to find this guy, well, answering nature's call. What I find so weird is the extent of this guy's jaw drop, and how he keeps the exact same face throughout the entire scene. Look, maybe it's just me, but the more you look at this and the more you think about it, the creepier it fucking gets. And it's one of those things that is so unnecessarily creepy, like who the fuck thought of this? Thank you, RGG Studios. Very cool. The Dragon's Path. The Dragon's Path is an official interactive webcomic that covers Kiryu's story from Yakuza 0 up until the beginning of Yakuza 6, and has a total of 10 chapters. This was promoted before the release of Yakuza 6, appealing especially to people who wanted to get up to speed without having played any or much of the previous games. It's a pretty neat creation, and it's still available for people to read. Just look up Yakuza The Dragon's Path on Google. A little update to this, sometime after recording this part, it seems that the webcomic is no longer available on the official website, but I think you'll be able to still find it if you just look online. Yakuza 6 Demo, quote-unquote. Oh man, this one caused a lot of noise back when it happened. So, Yakuza 6 was supposed to be released worldwide outside of Japan in April 2018, and in February, Sega had released a demo for the game that was around 30 gigabytes. You may be thinking, damn, that's huge for a demo. And that's because the demo actually had you download the full game, but it was heavily restricted. See, the intention was that when the full game came out, you would be able to use your demo save file and carry it over to the full game. And whenever you'd go to an area that was meant for the full release, you were supposed to get this message preventing you from proceeding any further. However, word started going around about how people were able to continue past this restriction and were able to play the whole game, essentially getting the game without spending a single dollar, and over a month in advance as well. Naturally, the demo was taken down not long after reports of that happening. Hamazaki Duck Scene. Much like the toilet scene mentioned earlier, this isn't anything hidden as much as it is just uncanny valley. In a cutscene shown in Yakuza 3, Hamazaki is shown to be trying to intimidate a Chinese restaurant to get them to regularly pay protection money. He'd wave this cleaver to try and further scare the guy, but then this happens.
陳さんの料理はうまいって評判じゃねえか。
親父、本家からの呼び出しです。6代目の件で話があると。
That has to be one of the most bizarre ways of asserting dominance that I've ever seen. Upscaled butcher knife. Take a look at this butcher knife in Kiwami 2. Pretty standard, right? Now look at this one in Yakuza Like a Dragon. It's such a small thing that I've noticed, but it's one that stuck out to me, and, well, now you know as well. The original Hamura. In Judgment, you meet a man named Kyohei Hamura, who is the captain of the Matsugane family, a family that Kaito used to run with. Hamura's face initially took after his voice actor, Pierre Taki, looking like this. However, after being arrested under suspicion of possession of drugs, more specifically, you guessed it, cocaine, RGG Studio pulled every copy of Judgment from the stores. This was around April 2019, and at the time, only the Japanese release had been out, and the English release was set for June of the same year. This caused worries as to whether or not it was going to be delayed, as they now have to replace Pierre Taki. And surprisingly, no delay was in sight, and it was going to release in June as originally planned. This isn't exactly relevant to the series as much as it is for Taki, but Square Enix also removed his voice work from Kingdom Hearts 3, and Sony Music stopped supporting his band, Denki Groove. Alrighty, this brings us to the end of Tier 4, and now we move on to Tier 5, the lower body, with things that are more likely less known compared to the things that we've already covered. Lao Kalong is alive. Lao Kalong is a villain that made his first appearance in Yakuza 1, or Yakuza Kiwami, as the head of the Sun... I was actually gonna fucking say Sunflower Triad, what the fuck is wrong with... Lao Kalong is a villain that made his first appearance in Yakuza 1, or Yakuza Kiwami, as the head of the Snake Flower Triad. Kiryu confronts him late into the game to take Haruka back from him, and then he doesn't show up again until Yakuza 3, when he comes back for revenge and now takes Rikia hostage to force Kiryu to fight him. After their fight, Kiryu attempts to save Rikia, but Lao holds him back and orders his men to hurry and kill Rikia. This is followed by abrupt gunshots that kill both Lao's men, and then Lao himself gets shot in the head, killing him obviously. Or did it? In Yakuza 7, a certain sub-story takes you to the Chinese part of Yokohama where you try to seek a legendary weapons dealer. After going through a set of tests, you meet the man himself. Look familiar? His name is Chao Kalong.
Beautiful eyes.
Ichiban introduces himself and says he's from the Tojo clan. Chao stops to think for a bit and brings up Kazama and Kiryu. We just mentioned Kiryu's history with him, and as for Kazama, there is a scene shown in Yakuza 1 where he breaks into the Triad hideout to save Kiryu and had his leg injured in the process. How Lao Kalong survived a clean headshot that isn't a rubber bullet is beyond me, but hey, Kashiwagi survived being shot by a helicopter turret, so there's that. Kiwami Mine. I don't really know much about this one except that apparently Mine's files are in Yakuza Kiwami. You can find this picture in one of the Wikipedias for Yakuza. Leftover files being found in Yakuza games isn't too strange because the games have a habit of leaving an abundance of files from other games for whatever reason. So I'd assume Mine's model was either for testing purposes or they simply forgot about it. There is one thing that I do want to talk about here, and that concerns a certain MIA agent that I've seen so many, and I mean so many people say that he's just reusing Mine's model. Here's a picture of the two side by side. If you ask me, I think that Mine's face looks vastly different from the agent's. The hair maybe you could make a case for. I can see that looking similar to Mine's, but kinda flipped. Kiryu and Majima in Project X Zone 2. Project X Zone 2 is a tactical RPG game for the 3DS that boasted a significant number of crossovers from many different games. It included iconic characters such as Jin, Heihachi, and Kazuya from Tekken, Chris, Leon, and Jill from Resident Evil, Dante and Virgil from Devil May Cry, Kiryu and Majima from Yakuza Death Souls specifically, Kite and Haseo from the Dot Hack games, and the list just goes on and on. One of the game's selling points is you get to see your favorite characters interact with each other. You can find many clips of said interactions on YouTube, and I recommend you guys give it a watch because it's so amusing seeing Kiryu and Majima having a conversation with, say, characters from Resident Evil. Syntax error. Syntax error is a recurring sign of a bar in Champions District that you can see in multiple games. I thought it deserved a place in this iceberg because I don't know how many other people noticed it, but the amount of games this shop retains its place is actually kind of impressive. You get to see it in Yakuza 0, 3, 4, 5, 7, Judgment, and Lost Judgment. And even the Kurio games. I may have missed some games, so please do let me know if there's a game that I didn't mention. For a place that you can't even go to in any of the games, I do think it's interesting how they never forget about this place. Install screens. God, I miss these. Back during the PS3 era, inserting a disc and booting up a game usually brought up this screen, showing you the progress of a game installing. Not Yakuza games though. Most Yakuza games went a little above and beyond and brought you something more like this. This was fantastic for the time, and it blew me away seeing something like it. Now, as I previously said, this wasn't featured with every Yakuza game. Games like Yakuza 3 and Kenzan did not have a special install screen, but games like Yakuza 4, 5, 0, Dead Souls, and Ishin all had one. Now, as you know, on the PS4, installing a game takes way less time than it did on the PS3, but you could actually still access these install screens in the cutscene viewer in each game. They usually happen to be the very last cutscene in the viewer. Tattoo competition. With the release of Yakuza 3 back in 2010, Sega had a contest going on where contestants had to write down in 25 words or less why they thought they deserved to win a real-life Curious Dragon tattoo, which costs a whopping $9,000. The winner was a man from Liverpool, Australia by the name of Fari Salievski. You can take a look at the final product right here. Nagumo's voice actor's real Yakuza ties. Hiroyuki Miyasako, the actor who voiced Nagumo in Yakuza 6 as well as Kanda in Yakuza 3, is a 52-year-old comedian. He, along with 11 other actors, were fired from his talent agency after the discovery that they attended a party hosted by someone linked to organized crime. This came to light in June 2019, but the actual party was 5 years before that year. It was discovered that the group hosting the party were involved in money transfer fraud, and Miyasako, as well as a bunch of other comedians, were providing entertainment for the people there, and they were paid for it. Those are the facts, but the question remains, was he truly guilty for anything at all? Well, as far as what I found goes, actors like this are fired even if they aren't aware of such a connection. In July 2019, a month after the scandal, the agency went on to accept the scandal and condemn Miyasako's part in the Yakuza in a press conference. I couldn't find any more on it than that, so it's hard to say for sure how intentionally involved he was. Nowadays, Miyasako has a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers and he uploads on it regularly. Baba is still waiting for Saejima. In the ending for Yakuza 5, particularly after beating Baba as Shinada, we get to see a cutscene in which, after everything that's happened throughout the course of the game, Baba reached a breaking point and was about to shoot himself. He's interrupted by old friends though, and is thus saved. They convey a message from Saejima, telling Baba that Saejima knew all along that Baba was acting out on someone else's orders, and that he'll be waiting for him at the Abashiri prison so that the two can get along on better terms, now that everything's over and they could atone for their crimes together. But Yagami's beta model. Hidden somewhere in the files of Kiwami 2, well before the release of the first Judgment game, is this curious model. Very interesting. This could have been some kind of placeholder model before they got to work with Takuya Kimura.
Higashi-san! Yagami ga Kaito mo issho desu.
どういうつもりですか、カイトさん。
抜き打ちに押しかけてきたのはそっちが先だろ。
何の用だっつってんだよ。
東、お前赤花を殺したか？
あ？
1年前 松金組に押し入った拳銃強盗だよ。そいつから1億回収したのはお前だったよな。でもちょうどその頃、赤鼻の死体を見たって人間がいる。撃ち殺されて下水に沈んでた。
Yakuza 0 and Ishin companion apps. Remember the sweet old PlayStation Vita? Yeah, that little thing had some sick companion apps for Yakuza 0's Japanese release as well as for Ishin. The very basic gist of what they are is they were a few minigames from those games jam-packed into an application where you could farm for some in-game money and make some small progress for when the game came out. The best part about these apps though is any game mode where you were able to see the actual game. In Yakuza 0's app, you could make money fighting in the underground Coliseum, and in Ishin's app, you were able to do this village farming minigame, craft weapons, and do dungeon battles. This kinda makes me wish we see more Yakuza handheld games, full-on games and not just applications. Forget Me Not. This is a sub-story in Yakuza Like a Dragon, and you might be wondering why it's all the way down here when it's probably not super uncommon knowledge. The reason more than anything is the implications and discussions that come out of it. If you don't know the sub-story, it's a little quest where Ichiban meets a girl in a white dress. She tells him that she remembers him from years ago, how he saved her life in Kamurocho and she never got a chance to say thank you. Ichiban is surprised as he doesn't remember her at all. The two spend some time together and it doesn't take long before you catch on to what's going on. This girl doesn't exist. At least in the present time she doesn't. Maybe it's a ghost of some life that Ichiban once saved on a normal day for him. Maybe his mind is making things up knowing what we know about him. It's really hard to say, and this uncertainty is what makes this sub-story so good yet so disturbing. Mark Hamill doesn't remember voicing Majima. Mark Hamill was the voice of Majima in the English dub for the very first Yakuza game on the PS2, which came out in 2005. There's even a video on YouTube where you get to see him on the job. Thing is though, when asked about that role on Twitter, he said he doesn't remember anything like that. Understandable though, who knows how many roles he had to play since that time. Gatorade. In the original release of Yakuza 3 on the PS3, particularly in this cutscene where you see Mine boxing in his office, you'll see him drinking from a Gatorade bottle. This was likely an advertisement that they didn't have the rights to anymore by the time the remaster was out, so it was replaced with a generic tag. Yakuza Stage Play. In 2015, a stage play for Yakuza became a thing. It covers the events of the first Yakuza, but it also has cameos of Yakuza 2 characters for some reason. It's a long watch, about 2 hours and a half, but the whole thing is on YouTube, subbed and everything, so you could just watch it anytime you feel like watching it. Oh yeah, and sure, Chimono, I'm not cold anymore. This is a phrase from a sub-story in Yakuza 0, possibly another ghost sub-story. Yay, we love these, don't we? You meet this lady in a back alley, not sus at all, and she tells you she's cold, and what you have to give her is Odin soup. And guess what she tells you now? I'm not cold anymore. As thanks, she gives you a videotape and says nothing else. When you go and try to play it and see what's on it, it's, empty. Well, except for this. Once you up and leave, you see this little scene. Yakuza 6 Alpha Demo. The very first demo of Yakuza 6 we got is intriguing for many reasons. First of all, I should mention that this was a Japan exclusive. You could get it if you bought the Japanese release of Yakuza Kiwami at the time, which had a code in it for the demo. I happen to have footage of it on my channel if you're interested in seeing it. But enough about that, and let's talk about the facts. This demo is where Kiryu's blue casual jacket outfit comes from, and while it is a demo for 6, the events of the demo are entirely exclusive to it. You don't see them in the final game or anywhere else. What you do see, however, is characters that ended up being in Yakuza 6 in another form. Ed makes an appearance, and this guy ends up being one of the main villains of Yakuza 6's clan creator. Haruka makes an appearance at the very end as well, and it also had a couple of sub-stories that he could do if I remember right. Arase's redemption. We've spoken briefly about him before, but Kazuto Arase is a Yakuza 1 villain who was responsible for the deaths of Reina and Shinji. This guy not only makes an appearance in Yakuza 3, but he also shows up in, you guessed it, Yakuza Dead Souls. You meet Arase in there where he has a bunch of sub-stories dedicated to him, and he eventually becomes a potential zombie-killing buddy you can have alongside you. Pretty epic, huh? Oh, and one more fun fact, Arase gets to meet Gary Buster Holmes in Yakuza Dead Souls, so that's awesome. T-posing Haruto. This is a bug that happened with some Yakuza 6 players. Yeah, self-explanatory. The Chicken of Dojima. This is a bug in Yakuza 5 with Kiryu in particular that a friend of mine discovered and told me about many years ago. In any given fight, as long as you have heat mode, going into his rage state and then pressing triangle and circle in that order continuously will result in this goofy animation mix. So, how are we doing so far? We've just reached the end of Tier 5 and we're now nearing the lowest pits of the iceberg. Buckle up, we still have a lot of things to cover as we now dive into the next tier, the depths. The tier before the final one. Kuroiwa didn't gouge out any eyes. Pretty interesting revelation that you come to learn by the end of Judgment, and I feel like it's easy to forget, so that's why it's here. For the whole game, you're led to believe that Shono only did the testing for AD9, but not any killing, and that Kuroiwa was the one who did just about all the bloody work. We also never knew why all victims had their eyes gouged out. It could have just been some kind of signature that Kuroiwa was leaving on every victim. You don't know for sure until you see this monstrosity. This really drives home that Shono was the perfect example of frail on the outside and a monster on the inside. And if Kuroiwa himself, a deranged serial killer, reacts to this information the way he did, then it's like, damn dude, Shono, you're a fucked up bastard. Kumaki time traveling. Sotaro Kumaki is a master of martial arts. He appears as an NPC in the very first Yakuza game on the PS2, particularly after you finish the Underground Coliseum segment of the story. And if you talk to him, he'll tell you that he's seen you fighting in there, and then he'll go on about how Kiryu is a diamond in the rough and can be much stronger, and offers to teach you some moves that prove to be very helpful. One example is the fabled Tiger Drop, a move that is no stranger to most Yakuza fans at this point. Kumaki shows up in several Yakuza games after that, in Yakuza 2, 3, 4, 5, and even 0, which has a younger version of himself. And in 5, we get to meet his grandson, Sosuke. Chronologically speaking, he never shows up after Yakuza 5, so we don't see him in Yakuza 6, or Like a Dragon, or even the Judgment games. This naturally made a lot of people wonder what happened to him. The very short answer is most likely development time constraints, or deadlines, or something along those lines. But I guess if you want an entertaining take on it, you might enjoy this part. Kumaki is seen after Yakuza 5. but not in a mainline game. He makes a return in Fists of the North Star Lost Paradise of all places. You get the sub-story from the guard barracks and you're told that there's an old man that wants to see you. When you meet him, he says he wishes to test the might of Hokuto Shinken and asks Kenshiro to give him everything he has. Once the sub-story is over, he mentions heading to the Coliseum nearby. If you've been watching since the beginning, you'll know that this is a game developed by RGG Studios as well. Now it could have just been that they wanted to throw in a Yakuza touch into this game, so they threw him in, or Komaki could be time traveling, leaving thousands of Yakuza fans questioning his whereabouts. Either way, it's fun to think that he just jumped between dimensions because he wanted to find another tough opponent. Green Shadow. This is a sub-story for Saejima in Yakuza 4, and much like the previous sub-story entries, this is this low in the iceberg because of the implications it entails. The sub-story begins with homeless men near your hideout talking about their food being stolen and some kind of monster-like creature called kappas. In Japanese folklore and mythology, kappas are humanoid turtle-like creatures that are known to love cucumbers and they also love to engage in sumo wrestling for some reason, but the latter part isn't important to this segment, the cucumber part is. After hearing these rumors, approaching your hideout shows you a scene where Saejima finds a mysterious person in his hideout, but upon checking, nothing was stolen. Saejima then sees two homeless men that talk to him about the whole phenomena, and you're told that there's a kappa hiding in the manhole in Children's Park. So Saejima says he'll go check it out. When you arrive there, you see a curious man checking out the same rumor, and jokingly mentions that maybe he should have brought a cucumber so that maybe the kappa would show itself. After trying a few things, Saejima ends up catching something. A man in a kappa costume. You'll have to chase him, and once you catch him, he's saying he's doing all of this for a TV show. However, Saejima then asks him about whether or not he was the one who invaded his underground hideout, and the guy says he's never been there. He's only been in the underground mall and below the Children's Park. After the guy walks away, we get a very interesting cutscene. Well then, the list of supernatural beings existing in Yakuza only gets bigger and bigger, doesn't it? Kuruyo TV series. Kuruyo, or Black Panther, has a TV show with 2 seasons. I haven't watched the TV series for myself, but from what I asked around, the show changes quite a lot of things from the games, especially in the first season. For example, spoiler alert by the way if you care, in the show's season 1, Tatsuya's sister dies at the hand of his best friend, even though in the games she remains alive even after the events of the second one. Season 2 depicts the game's bosses and characters more accurately, but there are still differences, like Nozaki Ryo not being a fight at all. Nagoshi in the Kuruyo TV series. Toshihiro Nagoshi is the reason why the Yakuza series exists. He was the general director of RGG Studio until last year when he officially left to join NetEase. I can't talk about his role much since I haven't seen the show for myself, but Nagoshi plays a Tojo Yakuza character who isn't good or evil as far as I'm told. And he interacts with the protagonist, Ukiyo Tatsuya, as well. Not much in Season 1, but more so in Season 2. Living Mannequin. This one has to do with Kuruyo as well. In Kuruyo 2, you're able to practice some moves by talking to a certain NPC. Your training opponent is, well, a fighting mannequin. Interesting. Prequel movie. As of now, there are 2 Yakuza movies. The one most people know about is the one we already covered in the 3rd tier, but there's one other movie that is much less talked about. Like a Dragon Prologue, or Ryuga Gotoku Josho. This movie came out in 2006, and it covers events way before Yakuza 1 leading up to the arrest of Kiryu and ends before he is released. We get to see Kiryu, Nishiki, and Yumi as kids in Sunflower Orphanage, and how they get to become part of the Yakuza. The full movie is on YouTube if you're interested in watching it. Jungi-han is immortal. This is a half-joke entry, but there is some truth to it, and I think a lot of you know where this is going. Let's start with the formalities. Jungi-han is one of the main villains in Yakuza 6. The Jingun Mafia show up again after their last appearance in Yakuza 2, and he's their new leader. He also took control of Stardust and changed it, or should I say, turned a part of it into something that offers, extra services, let's say. If you've played or watched the game, you'll know that he ends up dying afterwards by a clean gunshot to the head. So, he's dead, right? Yeah, well, before its release, Yakuza 7 or Yakuza Like a Dragon came along and dropped a trailer where we see Ichiban fighting Jungi-han. What? This left many people with a combination of feelings. Some people were dumbfounded, others amused, and others agitated. As we all now know, the Jungi-han we see in 7 is a body double that failed to take the place of the original at the time of his death. It's a pretty convenient excuse to bring back a character that was popular, but it also does make sense for a crime boss to have a body double. Guess what though? Those two are not the only Jungi-hans that are out there. There's possibly a third one that many don't know about, mainly because he's in a game that only a tiny fraction of the fanbase plays. That's right, Yakuza Online, baby. God, that game is a gigantic beast of hidden lore by itself, and just you wait. We'll get to it in more detail later on in the iceberg. So, Yakuza Online has 3 story modes. One that covers the story of Ichiban, one which is Yakuza 1 Retold, and the third one is a brand new story featuring Ryuji and Jungi-han as his partner. Your first question will probably be, is this even canon? Yes, it is. There's a blog by Dojima's Dragon Girl who took the time to translate all of Ryuji's story, and according to them, this story is canon. I'll leave the link to that in the description if you're interested. Ryuji's story in Yakuza Online takes place in 1999, so that leaves us with a couple of interesting questions. Could the Jungi-han of the story be the same as any of the two that we know? I think it's very unlikely given that this is 17 years before the first and original Han Jungi even came to be. And second, with this Jungi existing, is the original Jungi in 6 really the original one? If Jungi-han was a thing even in 1999, just how far back did the origins of this man go? Nagoshi as Jingu. In Like a Dragon, the movie, the same movie that covers the events of Yakuza 1, Kyohei Jingu is played by Toshihiro Nagoshi, the ex-general director of RGG Studio. You gotta respect how involved this man wants to be with these games. He is the reason they exist after all. World War Amon. In Yakuza Dead Souls, after finishing all 60 sub-stories and Subterranea missions as well, you'll receive a message from Joe Amon asking you to meet him in the underground tunnels. When you get there, you do meet him and you get a conversation which is about what you'd expect Joe to say before fighting Kiryu. Then when the two get ready to fight, their conversation is interrupted by a mysterious zombie. This zombie attacks Joe Amon, knocking over his glasses, and he puts them on and now you have to fight him. This man is Rasetsu Amon, a member of the Amon clan from just about a decade ago. The outfit he's wearing resembles the Imperial Japanese Army uniform from the early 1900s. This is one of the very few instances of a truly unique Amon clan member that we have. Another example is Noah Amon from Yakuza 5. The idea of fighting a zombified ancient Amon in modern times as Kiryu is so cool. By the way, Rasetsu apparently means some kind of evil spirit. Pretty fitting. Okay, I'm putting an extra spoiler warning here because this is an entry about Like a Dragon Ishin, which we now know is coming soon. So mute and skip this entry to safely go to the next topic without hearing anything at least. Takechi Hanpeita's hair change. Takechi Hanpeita is a character in Ryuga Gotoku Ishin or Yakuza Ishin, whichever you prefer to call it. This guy ends up being the main villain and a rival to Ryoma. There is one cutscene though where something pretty strange happens. Ryoma comes face to face with Takechi after a while of not seeing each other and, well, I don't know how to explain this other than it's for dramatic evil reveal purposes, because this is the only scene where he has white hair and then after that it just goes back to black like nothing happened. It's pretty anime. Yakuza characters in binary domain. Binary Domain is a third-person shooter game made by RGG Studio, and it has nothing to do with Yakuza by itself as far as I know. The only thing it has in common with Yakuza is that it takes place in Japan, and well, there are a few Yakuza character appearances in a DLC for its multiplayer mode. The DLC was free, and you'd be able to get Kiryu, Majima, Akiyama, and Ryuji. The choice of characters was specifically taken from Yakuza Dead Souls, as those 4 characters are the main characters in there. Unfortunately though, this DLC is exclusive to Japan. Majima canonically published a song. Here we are once again talking about the PSP spin-offs, the Black Panther or Kurio games. Those games happen to have the popular karaoke minigame in it, though it differs greatly from what we've come to expect now. Unlike Yakuza, where you start out normal and work your way to a dramatic imaginary scene, you go through a slideshow of static images seeing Tatsuya sing, quote-unquote. In Kurio 2, there is a song called Majima no Majirock, sung by, you guessed it, Majima. This implies that at some point, Majima took the time to somehow record the song and publish it in this universe, and now our boy Tatsuya gets to sing it. Wonderful! Also, one little fun fact about the song, they made physical discs containing a video clip of the song where you see cutscenes of Majima in Kurio's art style as the song plays. I think this disc was either some kind of pre-order bonus or just an extra that you'd get if you ordered the game. Kurio Secret Bosses. We're talking an awful lot about these games in this tier, aren't we? Well, it does make sense given that these are probably the most obscure games, relatively speaking. Maybe along with Dead Souls. Kenzan and Ishin were never released in English. Man, what can I say? Times change. But the love for them is still burning bright to this day. Anyway, the Kurio games, like other Yakuza games, have secret bosses in them. However, for one reason or another, these are the 2 only games in the series that don't have Amon Clan secret bosses. Every other game, and even spin-offs like Judgment, Lost Judgment, and Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise, all have Amon secret bosses. Unfortunately, the secret bosses for Kurio are kinda lame. At least I can tell you with confidence that the first game's secret boss is. I've yet to fight the second game's secret boss. The first game's secret boss is just some buff dude who literally takes over 20 minutes to beat on max level even when you go ham on him. There's nothing interesting about him at all. But hey, you know what he does that other secret bosses don't? He says, "You are the strongest man." Congratulations, player. Dead Souls poster. This is kinda wild. In the beginning of the movie A Fairly Odd Christmas, there's a shot taken in Japan, and in it you can see a poster of Yakuza Dead Souls. My boy's getting into the big leagues. I'm touched. Joe Amon is dead. Much like Komaki, Joe Amon's last appearance is in Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. He serves as the secret boss for the game. However, unlike Komaki, Joe might have a much more incriminating reason as to why he never showed up again after Yakuza 6. After you're done fighting him, he... well... So, until we see him come back again in a Yakuza game somehow, I think it's safe to say that Joe time traveled to Fist of the North Star universe only to get his ass murdered by Kenshiro in there. Alright, good job on making it this far. We're almost done now as we head into the final tier, the Abyss. RGG Online Lore, or Yakuza Online Lore. Oh boy, now we're getting into the fun stuff. So it's a given that there's not many people out there that are familiar with RGG Online to begin with. Most will probably just tell you, yeah, I know that there's a gacha mobile game for Yakuza, but I imagine that's the extent of most people's knowledge. And for good reason. This game has remained unlocalized for almost 4 years at this point. And given that it's just a mobile game, the chances of us getting it in English are unfortunately pretty slim. With that being said, however, the lore of this game is an enormous, colossal beast. The first question that will most likely cross your mind is, okay, well, if we're talking about the lore here, is this game's lore canon to the mainline series? The surprising answer is yes, for the most part. I say for the most part because aside from myself vaguely remembering hearing something of this nature a while ago, I went ahead and looked it up, and it seems the only things that aren't canon are the things that conflict with the events of the mainline series. So, for example, Ichiban's story in RGG Online, while sharing similarities, is completely different from the one we see in Yakuza Like a Dragon. Therefore, we can rule out his entire RGG Online main story as being non-canon. Here are some interesting differences in Ichiban's story in this version. 1. Akiyama plays a role in the story, and he and Ichiban become good friends and fight alongside each other. While we're talking about Akiyama, it's worth mentioning that Akiyama might have been planned to be in Yakuza 7, but was replaced by Nick because of the budget. It does make sense when you consider that Akiyama could have befriended Ichiban the same way Nick did, and he would have helped you with the business minigame and in that one scene near the end of the story as well. My best guess is that they wanted to focus more on bringing new characters rather than relying on existing ones. But I also keep hearing that his voice actor is pretty expensive and that he's been busy with other projects. 2. Mitsu, one of the few characters in Yakuza Online who does end up making it to Yakuza Like a Dragon with almost no changes to appearance, has a bigger role in Yakuza Online. You end up fighting him and then he ends up leaving the Arakawa family and joins Ichiban on his quest. 3. There is a detective character helping Ichiban, but it's not Adachi. Other allies include Mayumi and Tsuji. Naturally, this means characters like Sayako, Adachi, and Namba are unique to Like a Dragon, at least in terms of story. They did end up releasing those 3 in Yakuza Online, and they do have their own side stories, but they're not in the main story. Number 4. The Omi clan has 4 prominent figures that you end up going toe-to-toe with. Vincent, Kagami, Mikuni, and Sawashiro, all of whom never made it to Like a Dragon except Sawashiro. However, and this is just a theory, but Tendo was possibly inspired by Kagami, because for one, his full name is Yosuke Kagami, whereas Tendo is Yosuke Tendo. And looking at the both of them side by side does give that vibe. Number 5. Ichiban meets several trainers from the mainline series, such as Komaki and Saigo, whereas he doesn't meet either of those in Yakuza Like a Dragon. Number 6. Unlike Like a Dragon, where Tendo/Masato are the final bosses, the final boss in this game is Joe Sawashiro, and the fight takes place at the top of the Millennium Tower, and it ends in a draw. I should also mention, Masato does not exist in Yakuza Online, and therefore there's probably no coin locker baby fiasco. Number 7. Arakawa's affiliation and role is much more ambiguous in this game. He still shoots Ichiban and, quote-unquote, joins the Omi in this game, but we never see him again until the very end of the story, and it's in a phone call. The game ends in a cliffhanger, and we never really see whether or not this Arakawa had good intentions. Ichiban is still devoted to him throughout the story, though. I've seen someone theorizing that a certain anonymous character, whom we also never see but only hear, is in fact Arakawa, helping Ichiban throughout the story from behind the scenes. And as crazy as it sounds, these are just some examples of how different the story is in this game. All of these aforementioned points naturally entail even more events that did not happen in Like a Dragon. I don't want to go into detail more than I already have because this is an Iceberg video and not a goddamn Yakuza Online lore video, but I do find a lot of things in this game interesting that I do want to paint a clear picture of just how much story there is in this game that people are missing out on. So with Ichiban's story briefly covered, I want to move on to something else. Something that we've spoken briefly about before and is apparently canon and also exclusive to Yakuza Online. The Golden Dragon's Wanderings. That's right, Ryuji's own campaign. The Golden Dragon's Wanderings is a story much shorter than Ichiban's, where Ryuji is the main character. Whereas Ichiban's story is 22 chapters, Ryuji's story is only 6 chapters. The story begins in 1999, where Jin Goda was soon to be the chairman of the Omi. Word spread around that Jin had already chosen who his successor would be. Said successor was going to become the head of the Goryu clan, and the rumors were that it's going to be Ryuji. One day, an Omi messenger tells Ryuji to head over to the headquarters because his father, Jin, wanted to discuss something with him. The messenger tells Ryuji that this is likely going to lead to Ryuji taking control of the Goryu clan. However, upon arriving there, Jin surprised Ryuji by telling him that he's been expelled from the clan. Of course, Ryuji thought this was some kind of sick joke and didn't take that, so he drew his sword at Jin, and that's when he stands up from his wheelchair and beats the ever-living shit out of Ryuji. Of course, Ryuji's reaction is the same as you and me right now. What happens after this is Ryuji goes on something of a self-discovery journey, a soul-searching trip if you will, in which he meets a lot of familiar faces such as Jungi Han, Shinada, Kuze, Kitakata, and even Ichiban. Long story short, the story comes full circle at the end where all the people Ryuji meets shape him into being less of a hothead. So he has a fair rematch with Jin Goda, and this is where you see just how much heat Jin is packing underneath, no pun intended. So this time, Ryuji wins the battle, thus taking control of the Goryu clan as we see him in Yakuza 2. If you want to read the full translation to this story, I highly recommend you check out Dojima's Dragon Girls blog, because she has done an amazing job translating Ryuji's story in addition to Ichiban's story and more. Aside from Ichiban and Ryuji's stories, the game also brought the entirety of the Yakuza 1 story, but it's pretty much the same, so I'm not gonna talk about that. But there are character-specific stories for many, and I mean many, of the characters that you acquire. There are simply too many stories and bits of information to dive into with this game, and I unfortunately don't understand all of them. However, to give you an idea of the nature of these character-specific stories, I do want to talk about one that I do understand a bit of, and I find it so ridiculously amusing. Remember our good old American antagonist, Andre Richardson? Well, if you manage to acquire him, you'll gain access to an interesting anecdote. His story takes place shortly before he runs into Kiryu in Yakuza 3. You see him arriving in Kamurocho looking pretty grim, and then what do you know? The guy wants to take in the sights, eating good food around town, singing karaoke. Kamurocho lullaby, by the way. And then he even goes to a hostess club, just having a grand old time all around the city while carrying a gun, like your usual tourist would. He gets into fights at most of these places he visits, because as you may already know, Kamurocho thugs pick fights with just about every fucking person. The hostess club would be his last stop, because it's after that that he gets the call asking him to look for Kiryu, and his story ends there. This is about all I'm gonna cover with this entry, because I feel like this segment is already so large that it could be its own video, but I do hope you have a good idea now of just how much there is to read and to know with this game. It's easy to bash mobile games for being predatory towards its users with how they encourage you to spend money, and unfortunately, as someone that did play this game for a while, and I still do, I do think it's gotten extremely predatory by this point. But I'll just say that Yakuza Online expanding on characters, even antagonists and villains like this, is such a great idea, as it gives fans a sizable chunk of content to enjoy. Kuroyo manga. The Kuroyo games, in addition to having a TV show, also have a manga for them. It's pretty obscure, and honestly I don't know much about it myself, but it does exist and there's multiple volumes for it. RGG Kizuna. RGG Kizuna was a game developed by Sega and published by GRI for iOS and Android. It was released on March 26, 2012, and it was free to play. It's hard to find anything about this game, and it had a pretty short one as well, shutting down on August 31st, 2012, the same year as its release. Chef Tatsuya Restaurant Outrage. In Yakuza 5, there's a certain NPC that you end up meeting as every playable character. Tatsuya, the chef dude. He's based on a real person, and he's also a celebrity chef in real life. In 2013, an article popped up about the chef insulting less fortunate people because he charged customers 800 yen for water in his restaurant without any warning or explanation. Social media was just beginning to take off at the time, and people complained about the restaurant online, to which his response was, reviewers on the internet must be too middle class to understand the true value of his restaurant. Yikes. Also, I do feel like it's important to mention, I tried to look this up as much as I could, but this article was the only one that I could find, which is japancrush.com, and the only other thing that I found about it is people talking about the same article on GameFAQs.com years ago. So maybe it's one of those things that didn't become a big deal outside of Japan, but who knows. Hamazaki was planned to be a boss. I'll start by saying this is pure speculation on my part. Yakuza 3 has the survival mode that has you going around Kamurocho finding story bosses and fighting them for fun, going through them by story order until you're ready to fight Mine. Along the way though, you're able to fight one character who, while present in the story, had no story boss fight at all. Hamazaki. He has a generic heavy boss moveset and has battle grunts and everything, which makes me think they really did plan to have you fight him at some point. I mean, it does make a lot of sense. As you go through the story and watch that one cutscene in the Tojo introducing the new villains, you see Mine, Kanda, Hamazaki, and even Majima, all of whom you fight, except Hamazaki. If it really is true that he was at some point meant to have a story fight, I do wonder why they took that out. Dead Souls happened. I know what you're thinking. Very funny, Mr. DevilLeon7. We heard this joke enough for us to go ahead and give your shitty video a dislike right at this moment. Please hold on and hear me out. I know 90% of the time when people talk about Dead Souls being canon, it's just for the memes, but check out this clip. For those who don't know, Gary's Boot Camp is a location you're able to enter in Yakuza Dead Souls, and only in Dead Souls. It's a place where Gary Buster Holmes gives you a bunch of shooting training missions, and beating them gives you handy abilities. Now explain this to me. Holy... Guys! Yakuza Dead Souls is canon! What? What the hell is this place doing in Yakuza 5? Of course, the obvious answer more than likely is that they just reused at least a part of Kamurocho from Dead Souls for Yakuza 5 and forgot to change or swap out this part. It could also be an elaborate Easter egg just to mess with you. Or who knows, maybe Yakuza Dead Souls truly is canon after all. Kiryu's parents. Kiryu's parents were never at any point of the game seen. Not even for seconds. As long as we've known him, he's been an orphan, and it is revealed at the end of Yakuza 1 that Shintaro Kazuma was the one behind the death of his parents. But we never even knew why they had to die. It's something that doesn't necessarily need to be explored, but it is a mystery, and it will probably remain that way. What happened in Bacchus? In Yakuza 1, right before you find Haruka, Kiryu steps into the bar, Bacchus, and finds himself looking at several dead bodies, all of them shot. At the end of the bar, he finds Haruka with a gun. At no point is it explained what exactly happened here. My best guess is because that the owner maybe knew too much, someone from the Nishiki family was sent to kill him, and then ended up just killing everyone else to get rid of witnesses. What I mean by knew too much is before you go to Bacchus, Reina tells you that Mizuki has a bar named Ares, and the owner of Bacchus has connections with other bars and is likely to know about the whereabouts of it. Knowing that Reina is in cahoots with Nishiki, I do feel like this might be the most plausible explanation. Reina pretends to help Kiryu while also staying in contact with Nishiki to try and hinder his progress. But what do you think? Yakuza in Taiko no Tatsujin. Taiko no Tatsujin is a rhythm minigame where you press buttons to the beats of the songs on time to get a high score, much like how karaoke works in Yakuza. One of the songs you're able to choose is Machine Gun Kiss, and there are miniature versions of Yakuza characters taken from Dead Souls that show up in there as well. I think this is the same minigame that does show up in Yakuza 5, but Machine Gun Kiss as a song selection is not available in that version. Machine Gun Kiss is only available on Taiko no Tatsujin Portable DX, which is on the PSP. The Return of Shimano. This refers to a particular video where you see the English voice of Shimano from the PS2 release of Yakuza, Michael Madsen, on the job. It's a pretty amusing video and it's on YouTube, so I recommend you go watch it. There's a specific bit where he talks about the character and he says that somewhere deep down, perhaps Shimano is a good fella, and that if the game succeeds, we'll perhaps see a game called The Return of Shimano. God, why can't we have nice things? Yakuza 0 Walkman. The Yakuza 0 Walkman was a music device, a lot like the iPad, that was sold around when Yakuza 0 came out in Japan in 2015. It cost 30,000 yen, which is roughly $250, and it came with a neat DLC that allowed you to play different music pieces while walking around Kamurocho or Sotembori. It had stuff like the Japanese intro songs of all the different games. UFOs in Yakuza 6 on Lost Judgment. We're back to supernatural territory with more talk about strange creatures. In Yakuza 6, you'll be able to find UFOs floating in very specific locations. For them to show up though, you will need to buy an accessory called UFO Finder from Ibisu Pawn Shop in Kamurocho. Once equipped, you'll be able to spot these floating objects at a bunch of different locations. As for Lost Judgment, this one is seen in a sub-story revolving around UFOs where students are talking about them as well. For the whole sub-story, it has the narrative where the UFOs are fake and there's this one delusional student that believes in them, because aliens apparently took his dad away when really he ran away with another woman. Though after all is done and you debunk the whole UFO phenomena, we get to see a very intriguing scene where a huge-ass UFO just looms behind Yagami and Amasawa. Empty Tojo. Around when Yakuza Kiwami first came out, there was a strange bug during one particular cutscene around the beginning of the game, where you see Kazuma walking into the Tojo clan with his bodyguards. Normally you're supposed to see an army of guys bowing as he walks in, though the bug made it so that there was absolutely no one aside from Kazuma and his bodyguards. Pretty weird, but it was fixed afterwards. Kuroyo cameos. In the Kuroyo games, you're able to see a few characters from the main games, namely Yuya, Akiyama, Hana, Dr. Emoto, and the Florist. If there is someone I'm forgetting, please do mention them in the comments. You see Yuya at one point in the story in Kuroyo 2, and I think there's a sub-story in 1 where he shows up as well. Hana has a chance of showing up when you work as a part-timer in Kyushu number 1 star. As for Akiyama, there's a bit of an Akiyama everywhere system because you can see him in multiple places, including Kyushu number 1 star, the Bouncer minigame, and also in Hostess clubs. The Florist shows up in the main story of both games, and as for Dr. Emoto, you can visit him to heal your injuries. Ichiro Tanaka. Ichiro Tanaka is a boss in Kuroyo 2, and the reason he's so deep into the iceberg, well...
危ないファイティングスーツを身にまとい軍隊格闘を身につけた田中は危ない暗殺者不用意な攻撃をして隙を見せたらジャッと来るうまそうやな
He has a fire soundtrack though, seriously, go give it a listen. Just type Kuroyo 2 Ichiro Tanaka and prepare yourself for the best banger of the day. Child trafficking in Kenzan. Ryuga Gotoku Kenzan, or Yakuza Kenzan, is set in the 1600s, and one of the things it portrays is child courtesans being trained, which is pretty controversial to say the least. The Haruka equivalent in this game does get in there as well. Recently, with Ishin being remade and discussions for Kenzan happening more and more, RGG Studios said that if they remake Kenzan, they would have to change so much with it that it might as well become a new game. If they think that much has to change, then I would say part of that definitely is because of the whole thing going on with the child courtesans, and how that would be problematic to present now. Yakuza 3 poster in Gran Turismo. In Gran Turismo 5, a poster of the Japanese version of Yakuza 3 can be seen on a building that is supposed to be a Sony headquarters building. Yakuza 3 came out in Japan in February 2009, while Gran Turismo 5 came out in November 2010. Masato Arakawa is alive theory. I honestly don't know how much I believe in this theory, but I have seen it going around in the community. Masato Arakawa is one of the main villains of Yakuza 7. After fighting through thick and thin throughout the whole game and you go toe-to-toe against him, Ichiban tries to convince him to turn himself in and atone for his crimes. After eventually managing to get through to him, Masato's actions come back to bite him as a follower of his stabs him after the events of the game. As Masato is dying in Ichiban's arms, the scene is in slow motion, and we see them speak, but we're not told what is being said until after the credits, where it is revealed that Masato told him something along the lines of, "Starting over from rock bottom? I'll take those odds." This is the one sentence that led some people to theorize that he may still be alive but in hiding. I think it's unlikely, but I think I can see where they're coming from. Yakuza 4 Saijima and Haruka scene. We don't have to talk about this, right? Okay. In Yakuza 4, shortly after Saijima escapes prison, he lands at Kiryu's orphanage, where the first person he meets is Haruka, who drags him inside after seeing him knocked out on the shore. After he wakes up, he has a small conversation with her about where he's at, and then we get a cutscene that made so many people uncomfortable.
私はおじさんに連絡してくるね。
ちょっと。
おじさん。
どうしたんだ、はるか。
おじさん、おかえり。
ああ、もう大丈夫なのか。
うん、大丈夫みたいだよ。
うん。
あ、そうだ、私ちょっと町のスーパーまで行ってくるね。晩ご飯の用意しなくちゃ。
ん？あ、ああ。
それじゃあ、行ってくるね。
Alright, now let me make things worse for you by reminding you that Kiryu was watching this previously stranger to him over his daughter like that and decided to keep observing. You're welcome! Who is Hangman? Hangman, for better or worse, is an entity shrouded in mystery. You first meet him in Yakuza 6 as Kiryu while tagging along with Somiya in a now desolate Shangri-La, which at some point was a luxurious love hotel. Somiya tells you that for one reason or another, this place is now inhabited by junkies and basically very vile people, and it's Kiryu's and Majima's fault. Which, I mean, he's not wrong. As you go in further, you meet a terrifying leather-clad muscular dude who's more monster than a human, really. His attacks are pretty powerful and he's vicious. This would not be the only encounter with him in the series. Hangman makes a return to another love hotel in Judgment, where Yagami would now have the pleasure of meeting him in an even more horror-like setting. I gotta say, I really love how they did that in Judgment. We never really know what or who Hangman is beyond what we see. And honestly, it's probably best off that way. While we're on this topic, I should probably also mention Redman, a reskinned Hangman in Kiwami 2. Though he's not in the story at all. He's just someone you fight in a couple of different minigames, and you'd eventually be able to recruit him for Clan Creator. Yakuza Leather Book. This has to be one of the rarest Yakuza limited editions. As far as I've looked around, it's almost impossible to get your hands on one if you don't know anyone personally in Korea. The Korean release of Yakuza Kiwami got the Leatherbook limited edition, and as much as I tried to get my hands on one even before its release, I couldn't. Shame, because I think it looks pretty sick. Damn, we're at the end already? Well shit, we are at the end. Hey buddy! Unfortunately, as with all videos on this platform, everything has to come to an end. So I just want to say, thank you so much for watching this. It means the world to me that you're here, looking at me right now, watching this video. This video is very important to me because I consider it to be a love letter, not just to Yakuza, but also to the community, with how much effort went into this. And I just really couldn't be happier that it's finally out for everyone to watch and enjoy, and yeah man, it feels good. Now I usually don't like to do this kind of thing, but because a lot of work went into this, I would really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. If you enjoy Yakuza content, or heck, maybe even non-Yakuza content, then join the club. I also stream very often, so feel free to stop by and say hi. I will be sure to say hi back to you, friend. I also want to give a big thank you to my Hannya tier members for their constant support and love for the channel. You guys are a big part of why I continue to do things for this channel, and I'm really grateful for it. There is more to come, as I'm planning to do more big, well-edited videos, so you might want to stick around to see more of those as well. And yeah, on an ending note, again, I'm just really happy to finally be able to push this video out. And I can't wait to see what else is in store for the channel. Yeah, that's it, fellas. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Take care, stay hydrated, and stay safe. Bye-bye, everyone.